Chapter 138. Su Qingtan asked someone to hold Su Zipei's hands, and then he took the file. In the surprised eyes of the elite soldiers behind him, he said loudly, "The wife of the Su family, Madame Zhu, and the third daughter, Su Zipei." In the case of the theft of official silver, she helped Wu Yun, the culprit, to hide official silver in the Baiwei building, which caused Su Huanli to be imprisoned. After Wu Yun was brought to justice, she didn't repent and turned herself in. According to the law of the Dehan country, she should be arrested immediately. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhu Yan immediately screamed, "Su Qingtan, you can't do this to me. I'm your first mother. Do you want Su Li to have no mother? And your fifth sister, she was just born. Do you have the heart to do that?" Su Qingtan looked colder and didn't waver. "How dare you mention the fifth sister? After you gave birth to her, you treated her as garbage and let the second sister take care of her. I have lived for more than 10 years, but I have never seen a mother more vicious than the first mother. Eldest brother." Su Zipei struggled desperately on the ground and begged, "I'm really wrong. For the sake that I just listened to my mother, please spare my life. I'm sorry for the second sister, but you can't take revenge to death." Su Zipei immediately misunderstood Su Qingtan's cold-blooded appearance. She thought that he took revenge on them because of Su Li. Seeing that Su Zipei was pressed to the ground and half of her face was stained with black mud, Su Qingtan didn't want to explain, but he didn't want Su Li to be disputed because of this. He immediately looked a little relaxed and said lightly, "The Supreme Judiciary will deal with your crime impartially. You can avoid death, but you can't escape punishment." As soon as Zhu Yan heard that she didn't have to die, she stopped trembling. Since she didn't have to die, what was she afraid of? As long as Su Zipei worked hard, she would still have hope. Thinking of this, Zhu Yan immediately pretended to be bitter and said sadly, "Qingtan, your first mother is wrong and admits all the crimes. But your third sister is innocent. She didn't know who those people were. I asked her to lead the way. You can put her crime on me." "Mother." Su Zipei's whole body trembled, and her expression changed. She had selfishly wanted to get away from the crime alone, but her mother took the blame on herself. Su Qingtan snorted and said, "The Supreme Judiciary will decide whether he is guilty or not. Take him away." Ling Qinglan's henchmen looked at Su Qingtan with appreciation, and then they left with Su Qingtan and Ling Qinglan. People who liked to watch the fun had already gathered around. When they saw a large group of officers and soldiers coming out, they immediately pushed away to make a way for them. "Who is that? He doesn't seem to be from Qinghe City." "I don't know. Maybe he's a fugitive." Hearing the discussion, Su Zipei lowered her head. Her hair covered her blushing face. Her hands, which were cut behind her back, were clenched so tightly that they turned white. This moment was the most humiliating moment in her life, second to none. Even when he failed to make beggar's chicken in the Baiwei building, he was not as embarrassed as he was today. The only thing worth rejoicing was that they came from the Desu town, and people in the Qinghe town didn't know them. If their identities were recognized, it would be worse than death. Su Li watched the officers and soldiers leave. Then she looked at Ling Qinglan on the roof of the restaurant, who seemed to let down his guard and drank from time to time. She asked with a smile, "Child Ling, how many points do you think Su Qingtan can get?" She naturally knew that Ling Qinglan was deliberately testing Su Qingtan. Otherwise, there was no need to take so much trouble to bring people to observe secretly. Ling Qinglan smiled and said affirmatively, 5 points. The full score is 10. Originally, he could get 7 or 8 points. Unfortunately, the sentence, "he can be exempted from the death penalty," made him lose 3 points. What a pity. Such a low score. It seems that you don't like him. How about giving him to the Linley building? Su Li's eyes were bright, and her tone was serious. Ling Qinglan was stunned at first, and then he smiled and said, "Mr. Li, don't worry. I just said half of my words. Although the full score is 10, I appreciate 5 points. If he can be really cold-hearted, I really don't dare to use him." "I see," Su Li said indifferently, "a gentleman doesn't snatch what others like. Although I am not a woman, I can't compete with you. But, do you really know the weakness of child Su?" "Of course, his weakness is not the Su family." Ling Qinglan's expression was as if the question was too simple. He said, "Su Qingtan is young after all. He exposed his weakness from the beginning. If he can go to the courtyard of the school less, I may give him the best 6 points." Su Li squinted her eyes and said, "Child Qing, you deserve to be the think tank of a sect. But you have taken my wine. Aren't you afraid that I will poison it?" The middle-aged guard's eyes were cold, and he was instantly in a state of hostility. Ling Qinglan's right hand trembled slightly, and then he quickly calmed down. He shook the flagon in his hand and looked relaxed. He said, "I believe that the person who can make such a good wine is certainly reluctant to poison it. Am I right?" "That's not necessarily true." Su Li jumped out of the restaurant and turned into a wisp of smoke and went away from the top of the building. She said, "A flagon of wine costs 100,000 taels. Child, remember to pay the bill." Ling Qinglan was stunned again, and then he laughed more happily. But he didn't know when his back was completely soaked. It was the 15th of May. It was not a special day, but it was the day when the families of the officials of the Jin family and the Lin family were exiled. Early in the morning, the gate of the prison was crowded with people who came to watch the fun. If there were no officers and soldiers to maintain the order, it would have been crowded. As a victim of the case, Su Li was naturally invited by Yan Shishuan to watch from the attic with the best view. When she came over, there were 5 or 6 people in the attic. Ling Qinglan stood in the front, and then Yan Shishuan. "Workshop owner Su, I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you?" Seeing Su Li coming, Yan Shishuan hurriedly greeted her. The Yan family would dominate the Qinghe town in the future. Now he was in high spirits because of the happy event. His whole spirit was different. "Thank you for your concern, Lord Yan. I have been accompanied by you these days. My injury is not a problem now." Su Li smiled and shook her left hand. But Su Qingtan stepped over and stopped her. He blamed her, "Your injury still needs to be nursed. Don't move. The weather is getting hot. Remember to ask Mammy Li to change the gauze frequently." "Got it, eldest brother." Su Li stuck out her tongue. Yan Shishuan smiled happily. Finally, there was a Su family who regarded Su Li as a treasure. Otherwise, this girl's life would be too bitter. Seeing Su Li coming, Ling Qinglan nodded with a faint smile. He didn't care about Su Li for the time being. If it weren't for Su Qingtan, he wouldn't even pay attention to her. Boom! At this time, the gate of the prison was finally slowly pushed open by the officers and soldiers. A large group of prisoners in dirty white prison uniforms with handcuffs and fetters were driven out by a group of jailers. All of them had disheveled hair and looked frightened. Some of them didn't do anything wrong. But since they were born in the Jin family and the Lin family, they couldn't escape this disaster. The masters of the Jin family and the Lin family made a wrong decision. The people of the Jin family looked at the bright sun and sighed. Even if the first master could come back, they couldn't see him in this life. They only hoped that the first master could come back to avenge them. Nothing else mattered. Madame Lin didn't have time to care about her own safety. She held her son at this moment and said with red eyes, "Son, it's all my and your father's fault." It seemed that Lin Yanqing didn't hear his mother's words. His shoulders were covered with blood and the chains rattled. Cultivators who were exiled had to suffer the punishment of bone piercing. The 2 chains had just been planted and dragged on the ground. Every step he took, Lin Yanqing trembled with pain and felt that he was better off dead than alive. His eyes were red. He looked at the people around him who were pointing at him and smiled bitterly. Who could imagine that he, who held a small banquet in the Qinghe school and enjoyed great fame, became a useless person who was exiled today? Suddenly, he saw a tall tower. He stared at the few people who looked like gods under the illumination of the tower. Yan Shixuan, just you wait. I will pay you back 100 times for the shame you brought me today. Ling Qinglan touched his chin with interest. The teenager's eyes were interesting. Unfortunately, he was not smart. He showed hatred at this time. He glanced at Yan Shixuan secretly. As expected, he saw the killing intent flashed in Yan Shixuan's eyes. He was really reckless. Su Qingtan shook his head. If he were Lin Yanqing, he would keep a low profile at this moment and wait patiently for the soldiers to lose their vigilance. Then he would escape. Of course, he would not end up as miserable as Lin Yanqing. The road was very long. The Jin family and the Lin family passed through the streets of the Qinghe town like a parade and then went out of the city gate. Some people who threw rotten eggs, leftovers and even stones stopped and dispersed. When the parade passed through the gate of the Linli building, Luo Yichen saw it. Looking at Lin Yanqing who seemed to be crazy every step of the prisoners, Luo Yichen was tense and breathed slightly. He seemed to see himself in those years. Mei Ruhan grasped Luo Yichen's hands tightly and looked worried. Luo Yichen felt the warmth from the former and finally relaxed. Then his gentle eyes fell directly on the former's face. Fortunately, the 5 years of hellish days had passed, and the heavens compensated him with a fairy, so it wasn't a loss. Su Li didn't look at Lin Yanqing, but looked at Lin Xiang who mixed in the parade. The package of aphrodisiac was still in the underground addendum of the Linli building. After analysis, she also figured out the origin of the aphrodisiac. It was related to a sect in the martial arts circle. Since it was a cooked duck, she couldn't let it fly. The exiled prisoners left. Only the masters of the Jin family and the Lin family were left in the death cell. They would be beheaded later. Ling Qinglan took people back to Yunjing, but let Su Qingtan stay to deal with the affairs of the Su family. He also left a small number of people to Su Qingtan. The Supreme Judiciary was one of the most violent institutions in the Dehan country. Every officer of the Supreme Judiciary had the same status as any official of the Imperial Court in the 4th grade. Su Qingtan had this status, so he naturally had the qualification to settle down in Yunjing. Ling Qinglan once asked Su Qingtan to make a choice. In order to take care of Su Li, Su Qingtan finally chose to move his family to Yunjing. Su Huanli and others were naturally overjoyed when they heard the news. It was a great thing that they moved from the remote Desu town to a family in Yunjing. Su Huanli didn't have time to visit Zhu Yan and Su Zipei who were still imprisoned in the prison. He directly took a carriage to go back to the Baiwei building in the Desu town. Even the newly opened Baiwei building in the Qinghe town also put up a sign of selling land. Everything would start from the beginning when he went to Yunjing. Because Xu Yan was directly involved in the official silver, she couldn't escape the responsibility. Ling Qinglan gave the disposal power to Yan Shixuan. For the sake of Su Li and Su Qingtan, Yan Shixuan chose the lightest punishment, which was 20 strokes of the stick. Su Zipei's punishment was lighter. She only needed to be beaten 10 strokes of the stick. Even so, Zhu Yan's buttocks were beaten badly. She could only lie on the bed and couldn't get out of bed for half a year. Su Zipei also lay on the bed like her mother. But her injury would be completely healed in half a month. Looking at Suli, who was taking care of her mother and her, Su Zipei turned her head. Her eyes were full of resentment. Chapter 139. Suli took care of Zhu Yan for half a month. Every day, Zhu Yan looked at her as if she was an enemy without any complaint. Su Qingtan couldn't stand it. When Su Zipei's injury was almost healed, he immediately asked Su Zipei to take over Su Li's position and let Su Li go back to the school to have a good rest. I didn't eat the food you served. I'd better go back and have a rest. Su Qingtan looked at Su Li, who was pale because of lack of rest these days. He couldn't help but feel distressed. He hated Zhu Yan and Su Zipei more. If he didn't have to take care of Su Li with the excuse of moving the whole family, how could he let Zhu Yan go to the capital with them? Eldest brother, I'm fine. Don't blame me. I'm going back. Su Li forced a smile and turned away. After she disappeared in the gatehouse, Su Qingtan snorted and said to Su Zipei, who was back to him, "Don't think that I don't know what you and your daughter have done in the past 6 months. If Su Li didn't care about the old affection, I wouldn't care about family affection at all. You, take care of yourselves." Hearing the footsteps behind her leaving, Su Zipei's body was slightly stiff. Her nails pinched the wet cloth in her hand and her face showed a ferocious and unreconciled expression. Eldest brother. I am the daughter of the Su family. Su Li is just a bastard. Why do you spoil her? But don't even look at me. She took a wet cloth to wipe Zhu Yan's forehead. Her lips trembled and she whispered, "Mother, Zipei doesn't belong to the Su family anymore." Su Li didn't go back to the school. Instead, she went to the mansion of the Jin family, today's Li Mansion. After overthrowing the Jin family and the Lin family, Yan Shixuan kept his promise. He not only transferred all the land deeds of the Jin family to the Linli building, but also returned double the silver. The savings of the Linli building suddenly expanded unprecedentedly. The future income was not only from selling wine, but also from the rent of several streets. Of course, compared with these, Yan Shixuan got much more benefits. He knew that he could make a fortune in silence, so he didn't make it public and didn't act recklessly. In the Qinghe town without the Jin family and the Lin family, the distribution of forces seemed to be clear. On the surface, Yan Shixuan's family was the most powerful one, but only he knew that the Yan family and the Linli building were equally matched. Even the Yan family had to rely on the Linli building for many things. Yan Shixuan had always politely declined and feared the forces of the martial arts circle. But the appearance of the Linli building broke his rules. On the surface, it was just a winery. It didn't seem to violate the rules that the forces of the martial arts circle entered the secular world. The owner of the Linli building was also very kind. He was not as cruel and merciless as people in the martial arts circle who regarded people as non-entities. It could be said that the latter reason was the reason why Yan Shixuan didn't reject the Linli building. If the Linli building was the same as the force he used to be, he would have reported the existence of the Linli building to the imperial court and tried his best to eradicate it. Su Li, everything is packed. We can set off at any time. Yin Xuedong came in from outside and looked worried. She said, "But Yunjing is under the rule of the emperor. Ordinary people can't go there. What's more, we are." Chu Qingning scratched his head and looked at Su Li. With their identities, it would be a great thing if they were not arrested, not to mention entering Yunjing. How could they sneak into the city to open a winery? Su Li glanced at him and didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "How about your discussion? How many of you stay and how many of you go with me?" The forces of the Qinghe town had been stabilized. This was the base camp of the Linli building. Su Li must leave most of the people to develop the foundation and only take a few people to Yunjing. As for the candidates to go to Yunjing, she let Fang Yuan and others discuss it by themselves. As soon as she finished speaking, Fang Yuan stood up and said, "I will go with you. Xiaoling and Xiaomu will stay to help. I will stay too." Luo Yichen stood up and stared at Su Li's calm face. He said, "Unless Ruhan also goes." He knew that Su Li hadn't told Mei Ruhan her true identity, and the Mei family wouldn't allow Mei Ruhan to go to Yunjing with a group of unknown people. In this way, he could only stay. Su Li nodded slightly, and coldness flashed in her eyes. She said in a cold voice, "Luo Yichen, I don't restrict your freedom, but it doesn't mean that you can disobey my orders. You have to remember that you are working for the Linli building. Even if I want you to die, you have to do it obediently. Do you know that?" Luo Yichen held his breath, and anger flashed in his eyes. But when he thought that Mei Ruhan was still here, he had to lower his voice and nod to show that he understood. "It's good that you understand. The safety of the Linli building in the Qinghe town is entrusted to you. You and Fang Mu are responsible for the training of new members in the secluded site. If there is any mistake, I will hold you responsible." Luo Yichen was stunned. He thought that Su Li said so to let him go to Yunjing with her. He didn't expect that it was just a simple warning. Moreover, she was bold enough to directly hand over the Linli building in the Qinghe town to him. Wasn't she afraid that he would destroy the foundation of the Linli building? What? Are you not satisfied with me? Su Li raised her eyebrows and said in a teasing tone. Luo Yichen's face darkened. He knew that Su Li's words were not even a warning, but an extremely sinister prank. "Although I don't trust you, I believe that you care about Mei Ruhan." Su Li pointed at the position of Luo Yichen's heart and said in a feminine tone, "Even if it is the future of you and Mei Ruhan, you have to perform well. Otherwise, your Luo family will not allow you to marry a common woman." Luo Yichen's heart shrank fiercely, and his expression changed slightly. What did she know? There were thousands of Luo families in the Zhu Shou country. How did she know which Luo family he came from? Just thinking about it, Luo Yichen suddenly felt that his chest was patted gently. Immediately, there was a thin piece of paper in his hand, which was written AO sword skills. Even if you are over the age, you should at least be a young master. Don't let me down. Su Li said. Then she waved to Fang Yuan, Chu Qingning and Nin Xuedong, and left the attic first. Chu Qingning clicked his tongue and patted Luo Yichen, who was still in a daze. He said, "Since Su Li can give this to you, at least she completely trusts you for the time being. You have to perform well and break through the inborn realm as soon as possible." Yin Xuedong covered her mouth and chuckled. Then she followed Chu Qingning to leave. Fang Yuan walked at the end and unexpectedly stopped. He said quite seriously, "The Qinghe town needs a master of the inborn realm. The foundation of the Linli building should be guarded well." When everyone left, Luo Yichen looked at Fang Yuan's back and then lowered his head to look at AO's sword skills. Finally, he couldn't help but swallow hard. The swordsmanship classic can help break through the inborn realm. Su Li should have this kind of thing. Even the Luo family didn't have this kind of thing, which was comparable to the sacred canon. But Su Li just helped him a little bit, and he got it. At this moment, Luo Yichen's inner thoughts suddenly showed signs of changing. When Fang Yuan and the other two people followed Su Li to the underground adytum, they were all confused. They didn't know what Su Li would say. Su Li turned her hand and took out a wooden token. She put it in Fang Yuan's hand and said in a low voice, "Use this to enter Yunjing under the cover of the Tianya house. It is not a big problem." This token was left to Su Li by Ling Li at that time. Fang Yuan's expression changed slightly. Even if he was very reluctant, he could only nod because it was Su Li's order. "I didn't expect that Su Qingtan would come back in advance." My original plan was to let you sneak into Yunjing as servants of the Su family. Unfortunately, it is too late. Su Li sighed softly and took a pink package from the table and put it in front of everyone. In addition to entering Yunjing, there is one more thing to finish. In the Linli building, Yin Xuedong's intelligence was second only to Su Li's. She immediately recognized that this was the aphrodisiac that Luo Chen bought from the black market in the town, and it was made by Lin Xiang herself. Lin Xiang has been exiled now. Do we have to rescue her? Yin Xuedong didn't know the grievances between Lin Xiang and Su Li, so he couldn't help but ask. Su Li's eyes flashed and she said with a smile, "Rescue her. No, we have to nip her future in the cradle, or there will be trouble. If the elders in your family are well informed enough, they should know that there is a hidden sect in the martial arts circle in Nanjiang country, called the Hehuan sect." The three people heard it, but they were all at a loss. They had never heard of it. Seeing this scene, Su Li couldn't help but laugh. Even in the martial arts circle, the Hehuan sect was also a sect with a grade. Although it was the lowest grade 9, it was not known by ordinary forces. What's more, standing in front of her now was not the head of a family, but a lineal disciple. In short, you just need to know that the aphrodisiac in Lin Xiang's hands comes from the Hehuan sect. I don't know why the Hehuan sect will leak the formula. But once they know that there is such a girl in the secular world who can make it, what do you think they will do? Su Li asked. Chu Qingning immediately patted his thigh and said, "It turns out that Ru Chu. Lin Xiang will probably be accepted by the Hehuan sect. If she hates the Qinghe town, it will be a trouble in the future. You want us to kill Lin Xiang to avoid future troubles, am I right?" Su Li smiled and looked at Yin Xuedong. Yin Xuedong frowned. Since Su Li asked, her intuition told her that the answer would not be so simple. You do it for these obscene prescriptions. Fang Yuan suddenly frowned and asked, but if we get the prescriptions, where will we use them? He didn't believe that Su Li would do business with obscene prescriptions. Not only him, but also Chu Qingning and others would not be able to stand it. Su Li sat down and poured herself a cup of tea. She looked a little lazy. You are still too young. The three people heard it and raised their eyebrows. You're obviously the youngest one in the room. Su Li glanced at the three people who were angry and explained with a smile, the people of the Hehuan sect never believe outsiders. Even if they can investigate Lin Xiang's background, they will feel troublesome. If they find Lin Xiang, they will only kill her to avoid future troubles. What the three of you have to do is to ask the whereabouts of the formula before they find Lin Xiang. Su Li really did it for the formula, which made Fang Yuan's heart sink. I don't get the formula for business. Although the business of aphrodisiac has always been profitable. Su Li shook the teacup, and a trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. She said, I just want to let those bitches of the Hehuan sect have a taste of being framed. Do they feel good or not? The three people were relieved, and then they couldn't help but wonder how Su Li had contact with the Hehuan sect. There were even grievances. She had never been out of the Dehan country. Chapter 140. In the courtyard of the school, Mammy Li was busy packing. Almost all of Su Li's personal property was here. She was driven out by Mam Su Chui very early, so the Su family in the Desu town had nothing. Second sister, have you finished packing? We will set off in 2 days. Su Qingtan's gentle and clear voice came from outside the courtyard. Su Li looked up and saw Su Qingtan was tall and dressed in a light and elegant brocade robe. His long black hair reached his back and there was only a wooden hairpin in his hair bun. When he bent over and passed through the courtyard gate, his long hair immediately slipped to his chest. Seeing Su Li holding a scroll on the second floor, Su Qingtan smiled and showed a row of white and neat teeth. Only in front of the second sister could he show such a bright smile without scruples. It was impossible for others, even for his mother. Second brother. Su Li bounced downstairs, and the breeze blew her long hair behind her back. She had the unique intelligence and gentleness of a young girl, which melted Su Qingtan's heart. After suffering, his second sister could still maintain such a pure mind. It was really the most precious treasure in his life to have such a younger sister. Mammy Li is busy. Su Li looked at her eldest brother who was half a head taller than her. She was very calm. Her innocence had long disappeared with all the things in her previous life. She always kept vigilance in the face of the Su family, Qi Xianqing, Wen Ruomin, Yan Shixuan and other people who were kind to her. The vigilance had been engraved in her bones. But in front of the eldest brother, she was absolutely not pretending. She was really at ease and happy from the heart. Although the eldest brother had a relationship with the Yinma cult, in this life, the eldest brother could become famous at a young age and get the official position of the 4th grade. It was really great that he could live up to his talent. Well, you have a lot of time after you go to Yunjing. Can you spare some time for me? Suddenly, a familiar and strange voice came from the door. Su Li was slightly shocked. She knew the identity of the person. But she didn't expect that he came back at this time. Su Qingtan protected Su Li and suddenly looked back. He was stunned and said, "Dr. Qi. Why are you?" Although Qi Xianqing was not dirty and messy, he was absolutely not clean. With Su Li's eyesight, she could see at a glance that the old guy hadn't taken a bath for at least 2 months. Qi Xianqing came over and patted Su Qingtan's shoulder with appreciation. "You didn't let me down. Now that you've become a member of the Supreme Court, it's enough to protect your sister. But remember, don't be arrogant and complacent. There are even more muddy waters in the world, which Qinghe City cannot compare to." Su Qingtan's eyesight was much better than before. Now when he saw Qi Xianqing, he felt that he was back to the National Academy and faced the great scholar like the headmaster. Also, he felt that he was in the Yunjing horse farm and faced the powerful general. "Mr. Qi, what are you?" Su Qingtan wanted to ask, but Qi Xianqing waved his hand to stop him. He said, "I am just a villager. It is good that you want to take this girl to Yunjing. But your second sister is the most talented girl in the Qinghe town. She can't be neglected." Qi Xianqing said. "Sir," Su Qingtan was helpless. He also knew that. But there was no such thing as a win-win situation in the world. If he had a way to let Su Li enter the National Academy in Yunjing, he would have arranged it. Unfortunately, what was the National Academy? He didn't have that kind of power. "Of course, I know that you can't do it. I will arrange it. You can leave first. I will talk with this girl alone." Qi Xianqing angrily drove Su Qingtan out of the yard. If he didn't come back late this time, there would be a lot of trouble. There were too many spies in Yunjing. He didn't want to expose his whereabouts so early. Bang! Su Qingtan went out of the yard in a hurry. Before he turned around and said a word, the door was closed with a bang. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. After closing the door, Qi Xianqing looked at Su Li who was standing in the yard with a happy face. He was instantly angry and said, "You are so reckless. Why don't you think about your life? Tell me, how many times did you almost die when I was away? I didn't teach you to practice martial arts for fun." Looking at Qi Xianqing's angry face, Su Li held back the impulse to laugh. She lowered her head and said with grievance, "But I can't beat them, ah." Qi Xianqing patted his head. He was confused because of anger. Su Li couldn't beat Jin Qing Ao or the bastards of the Lianshi cult. Let me see if you have slacked off in practice during this time. Thinking of this, Qi Xianqing waved his hand. Su Li's eyes flashed with slyness. Her feet flashed, and a pink fist came to Qi Xianqing in the blink of an eye. Bang! Touching his sore eyes, Qi Xianqing was a little confused. He was beaten by his apprentice because of carelessness. Was it because he was too tired to run around these days? No. Qi Xianqing thought of something and suddenly became excited. He grabbed Su Li's wrist. Su Li immediately felt a homologous genuine energy flowing into her tendons and vessels. But compared with the black genuine energy she cultivated, this genuine energy was not pure enough. Su Li knew that this was because Qi Xianqing only had half of the Ghost Valley meditation direction. It turns out that this old guy has been stuck in the inborn peak. Unfortunately, it is too difficult to break through that level in the secular world. Thinking of this, Su Li slightly converged her pubic region and only revealed the cultivation of the acquired 8th hurdle. But even so, Qi Xianqing was still completely shocked. This girl. In just half a year, she jumped from the acquired 3rd hurdle to the acquired 8th hurdle. He remembered that when his master taught him to practice, he praised that he had reached the acquired 8th hurdle at the age of 18. It was a superior talent. Although he didn't have the appearance of a young master, it was enough to disdain warriors of the same age, which made his master feel inferior. But this girl was only 16 years old. Qi Xianqing couldn't help but tremble slightly. Could he cultivate a young master as his apprentice when he was old? Thinking of this, Qi Xianqing couldn't help but tremble with excitement. He immediately overturned the original road prepared for Su Li. The so-called natural law followed the natural law. Such a talented person should not be bound by him. Instead, she should develop freely according to her thoughts. He only needed to control the direction of Su Li's growth to ensure that she would not go astray. If Su Li couldn't break through the inborn hurdle because of his rules and regulations, then he would have no face to see his master in the afterlife. My apprentice, how did you practice? I estimated that you could reach the acquired 5th hurdle at most. I never thought that you could reach 3 hurdles more. Did you eat something? Qi Xianqing collected his thoughts and asked nervously. Although Su Li's foundation was stable, he didn't rule out that she had eaten some evil elixirs. He had to ask clearly. Su Li smiled slightly and said, "Master, come with me." Although the old guy was hypocritical in the previous life and even participated in the martial arts team against her, it was not his fault after all. His selfless contribution in this life was enough for her to pay back. She didn't like to owe others, and she didn't like others to owe her. Some accounts should be settled clearly in advance to avoid trouble later. Indifference flashed in Su Li's eyes. Unfortunately, Qi Xianqing followed her, and there was still a little excitement on his face. He didn't notice it at all. When they came to the room, Su Li asked Mammy Li to leave. Then she took out a piece of unknown dark yellow bast paper from the secret compartment. The surface of the bast paper was slightly ragged, but fortunately, the handwriting was still clear. Qi Xianqing knew at a glance that it was an old thing. Seeing Su Li handed over the scroll, Qi Xianqing was puzzled, but he still took it and spread it out. When his sight fell on the first line, his eyes suddenly became bigger than a copper bell. This was the second half of the Ghost Valley meditation direction that he had been looking for many years. It's really a case of wearing out iron shoes in fruitless search, but finding it by chance without any effort. Qi Xianqing tightly grasped the scroll with both hands, and his old eyes were slightly moist. Only he knew how many generations they had worked hard for the second half of the Book of Poison. He thought that he would be buried with regret in this life. He never thought that Su Li suddenly gave him such a big surprise. "Girl, where did you get this thing?" Looking at Qi Xianqing's old tears, Su Li smiled slightly and whispered, in the prisoner camp outside the Qinghe town. I felt the call of the unseen and dug it out from the soil. Prisoner camp, Qi Xianqing sighed with emotion. He didn't expect that the most important book of poison of his sect was hidden in the dirtiest place in the Qinghe town. No wonder he went everywhere, but he couldn't find any clue. That was, Su Li was destined to learn the second half of the book of poison. Otherwise, no one knew when the second half of the book of poison would appear. Su Li saw that Qi Xianqing's face kept changing. Sometimes he was happy, and sometimes he was sad. A glimmer of light flashed in her eyes. In her previous life, it was all thanks to those prostitutes who bullied and humiliated her that she had obtained the book of poison. If they had not pressed her head hard into the soil and almost suffocated her to death, she would not have noticed that the soil had a strange odor. She then dug it out of curiosity, and because of this digging, a terrifying demoness appeared in her previous life. Qi Xianqing had lived for several 60 years. He had extraordinary knowledge and high cultivation. After reading the second half of the Ghost Valley meditation directions several times, he had remembered the whole text. Then he carefully rolled the scroll, took out the piece of human skin, and gently put them in Su Li's hands. Disciple, you are destined to learn this thing. I naturally can't take it for myself. I am already satisfied to have the honor to witness the completion of the Ghost Valley meditation direction. There are few people in the Ghost Valley. You are my last disciple. You will inherit the Ghost Valley meditation direction in the future. You should take good care of the Ghost Valley meditation direction and its secret method. Don't let it be lost. Su Li was slightly shocked. Although she knew that she was the last disciple of Qi Xianqing, she didn't expect that Qi Xianqing valued her so much. For a long time, she always regarded Qi Xianqing as a convenient shield. In her eyes, the relationship between them was more like a transaction. If you gave me the first half of the Ghost Valley meditation direction, I would give you the second half. If you gave me the secret method and the disguise skill, I would give you something else in the future. A teacher for a day is a father for a lifetime. Su Li lowered her head and rolled her eyes. There was a touch of sarcasm in her eyes. She didn't expect that Qi Xianqing still maintained such a traditional and simple idea in his heart after living in the martial arts circle for a lifetime. He really regarded her as his own daughter instead of controlling her as a tool to strengthen himself. Seeing that Su Li slowly took over the scroll in her hands, Qi Xianqing smiled knowingly and felt relieved. He came back in a hurry to see whether Su Li was well or not. Now he felt that this girl was so lucky that he didn't need to worry too much about her future. Thinking of this, Qi Xianqing touched Su Li's long black and smooth hair and said kindly, "Disciple, what do you want to do in Yunjing? You can tell me. Maybe I can help a little." Chapter 141. Qi Xianqing heard the words and laughed. He shook his finger and pointed at the tip of Su Li's nose. He said, "Disciple, it is not difficult for your master. Anyway, your master has been an official in the Han dynasty for a few years. I know the rules clearly. Let me think about it. I can study and practice at the same time." Without thinking for a long time, Qi Xianqing gave her 2 ways. He said, "The first way is that you enter the National Academy and become a student of the Girls' School of Martial Arts of the National Academy. Then you can naturally study and practice at the same time. Besides, there are many seniors in the National Academy. If you encounter difficulties in practice, you can also find help." Su Li immediately shook her head. She had too many secrets. How could she go to the National Academy in such an exposed way? If she was accidentally seen by others, she wouldn't know how she died. It is too ostentatious. I don't like it. Moreover, Master, didn't you say that unless it's necessary, we shouldn't enter the imperial court? If we enter the National Academy, I'm afraid that the day we come out, we'll be forced to join a faction. Qi Xianqing smiled happily when he saw his disciples smile. Su Li could see the situation so clearly. If she entered the officialdom, she would be a rare talent. If Su Li really agreed or hesitated, he would not be at ease to let her go to Yunjing with Su Qingtan. After testing her, he felt more at ease. Since I don't like it, I have a second way. Qi Xianqing smiled like an old liar. He took out an exquisite jade token with a line of small seal characters on the surface and a blank back. Then, he casually took out a dagger and slashed it at the back of the jade tablet. For a moment, jade chips flew everywhere. Su Li was inexplicable. She didn't recognize the origin of the jade token. Although she had been to Yunjing in the previous life, she couldn't get in touch with the things of the National Academy because of her identity. She didn't know the identity represented by the jade token. At this time, Qi Xianqing had stopped carving. He blew off the remaining jade chips on the back of the jade token and put it in Su Li's palm. Su Li looked at it and turned it over. She saw her name and a symbol that she didn't know the meaning engraved on the back. Master, this. Before Su Li spoke, Qi Xianqing raised his hand and interrupted, you carry this jade pendant with you. It can ensure that you are unimpeded in the National Academy, and it won't be too ostentatious. The only thing you need to do is to go to the courtyards next to the National Academy every day. But you can also take the books there to read. It's not a waste of time. Later, Qi Xianqing muttered something, but the words were not clear enough. Su Li didn't hear it clearly. She put away the jade token and felt strange. She always felt that there was something that Qi Xianqing didn't tell her. But it didn't matter. As long as the first two sentences of Qi Xianqing were true, everything else didn't matter. After Qi Xianqing sent the jade token, he didn't stay here for a long time and left, saying that he was going to see an old friend. An old and kind figure flashed in front of Su Li. She couldn't help but shake her head. It was a blessing to see an old friend when she lived to the age of Qi Xianqing. After Qi Xianqing left, Su Qingtan, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately came in and asked with concern, "What did Mr. Qi say to you?" Su Li didn't hide it. She took out the jade token and showed it to Su Qingtan. She hoped that he could speculate the identity of Qi Xianqing. When Su Qingtan saw the jade token, his expression changed slightly. He couldn't help but take it and look at it carefully. After a long time, he raised his head and gave it back to Su Li. He said, "It's strange. It's not like the jade token of the National Academy. I once had a jade token and also saw the jade tokens of the teachers of the National Academy. They are different from yours." Su Li's eyes flashed, but she smiled and put away the jade token. She said with a smile, "It's not the same. It will be clear when I go to Yunjing. The teacher won't hurt me." Well. Seeing Su Li's bright smile, Su Qingtan looked solemn and sighed in his heart, "He won't hurt you. He is your benefactor." It was beyond Su Qingtan's imagination that the teacher could give a jade token and inscribe words on it. He only knew that even the best teacher of the National Academy didn't have the qualification. In another courtyard of the National Academy, a bamboo tea house was specially built. It was ventilated and cool. The plaque was engraved with, "A gentleman is like a bamboo." It was all green. Summer is coming. My tea house is finally put to use again. Haha. Ning Yunji happily tasted the tea that Ning Qing made for him and gently hummed the opera. Ning Qing, who was reading aside, rolled her eyes frequently. Su Li is about to go to Yunjing. Father, everything you have arranged is in vain. Aren't you disappointed at all? Ning Qing couldn't help but ask after putting down the book. Ning Yunji smiled and was about to say something. Suddenly, there was an unusual wind in the tea house. Then he only felt that there was a flash in front of him. There was one more person on the opposite side of the tea table. Who is it? Seeing the old man who appeared like a ghost, Ning Qing got up in shock. She subconsciously wanted to pull out the dagger on her waist. But she heard Ning Yunji shout, "Stop!" She turned around and looked at her father. Her almond-shaped eyes were bigger than walnuts. Her father even knelt and kowtowed to the old man who looked younger than him. Ning Yunji was so excited at the moment that he couldn't control himself. He saluted respectfully and said, "Teacher Qi. I am Ning Yunji. Greetings to you." At the moment, Qi Xianqing didn't smile like an old liar. Instead, he looked solemn and serious. He really looked like a super mundane person. "Qing, come and greet Teacher Qi." Ning Yunji scolded severely. Although Ning Qing was very unwilling, she still knelt down reluctantly and called him Grandmaster Qi. But she thought in her heart that it was not inappropriate for her to kneel down to an old man who was 70 or 80 years old. "Xiaoning, it's rare that you still remember me. I didn't expect that your daughter has grown up so much." Qi Xianqing sighed and smiled kindly. Ning Yunji then relaxed and said half-jokingly, 60 years have passed. If I don't even marry a wife and have children, won't my life be in vain?" Qi Xianqing heard it and immediately laughed. Ning Qing still doubted secretly. Was the old man who suddenly appeared as long-lived as her father said? She felt that Qi Xianqing was younger than her father. Qi Xianqing stopped whispering and took out a brocade box and put it on the table. He sighed and said, "Ning Yunji, you and I are not destined. It's rare that you still care about the old friendship and save the life of my last disciple. This is a thank you gift. You have to accept it." Ning Yunji was terrified in his heart. But he remembered Qi Xianqing's teaching, so he took it with trembling hands. Ning Qing rolled her eyes. A gentleman can be deceived by his integrity. That was what her father meant. This thing can prolong your life for 10 years. There is no disease or pain. I refined it in a circle. Qi Xianqing squinted and said, "Remember not to show it to others. I'm afraid that you will be killed. Now take it quickly. Prolong life for 10 years. Is there such a magical thing in the world?" Ning Yunji heard it with his eyes wide open. He immediately obeyed Qi Xianqing's instruction. He was going to open the brocade box and take the elixir. But before he opened the brocade box was taken away by Ning Qing. "Father, how can there be elixir to prolong life in the world? It's nonsense. Can he bargain with the king of hell? He must be an old liar. Father, you are confused." Ning Qing looked angry. She offended Qi Xianqing. Ning Yunji trembled with anger. His face was pale. He waved his hand to slap her. Seeing that her father was going to slap her because of Qi Xianqing, Ning Qing was so scared that she shrank and closed her eyes. The pain she imagined didn't appear on her face. She opened her eyes with grievance. She saw that Qi Xianqing grabbed Ning Yunji's hand. "Hee, you don't have to do this." Qi Xianqing let Ning Yunji sit down. He didn't look at Ning Qing. His tone was still calm. "You were like this in the past. If you didn't see something, you would be contemptuous of me like your daughter for the rest of your life." Ning Yunji heard that and remembered some past events. He immediately bowed his head in shame. So, Qi Xianqing said that they were not fated. His daughter was also not fated with Qi Xianqing, father. Ning Qing was so angry that her eyes were red. She felt powerless in her heart. She knew that no matter how she questioned, her father would believe in Qi Xianqing as if he was bewitched. She secretly decided that when Qi Xianqing left, she would immediately destroy the brocade box. She didn't want her father to eat the elixir that she didn't know what it was. Qi Xianqing smiled lightly. He was not angry at all. He said, "I come here just to return a favor. Your favor is repaid. Next, it's your daughter's turn." Then, he looked at Ning Qing. The latter suddenly snorted and turned her head. Ning Yunji was so angry that he almost turned the table. "Junior, sit here. I will do a divination for you." As soon as Ning Yunji heard that Qi Xianqing was going to do a divination for his daughter, he was overjoyed. He immediately held Ning Qing's hand and forced her to sit. Ning Qing was furious in her heart. She stared at Qi Xianqing taking out pieces of tortoiseshell. She wanted to see how this person deceived her father. Qi Xianqing was in a very good mood today because of Su Li. If it happened in the past, he would have already left. How could he still sit here? He was also a little uncomfortable to be suspected by the daughter of a registered disciple. At this moment, he was in a good mood and took out 3 pieces of tortoiseshell. He gently stroked the surface of the tortoiseshell with one hand. Immediately, a dazzling white light flashed through the cracks of the tortoiseshell. Ning Qing stared at it and almost thought that she was dazzled. It's just a small camouflage. There must be some mechanism. The luminous scale powder is hidden in the cracks of the tortoiseshell. Ning Qing thought to herself. However, what happened next made her unable to find any reason to do so. Because the 3 pieces of tortoiseshell suddenly flew up from the table and rotated around her. This, Ning Yunji was also shocked. He just saw that Qi Xianqing controlled a stone and beat away a group of thieves. Ning Qing's eyes were full of light. It seemed that she returned to her childhood and was full of novelty. She had long forgotten how she offended Qi Xianqing before. This kind of means was really, only immortals could do it, right? What her father said was true. Ning Qing couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. What she did just now was really too much, but at this moment, Qi Xianqing shouted softly. The 3 pieces of tortoiseshell immediately flew back to his hand and combined into a perfect one. At the same time, a line of white light appeared on it without any words in the world. Qi Xianqing frowned slightly and couldn't help but look up at Ning Qing. This woman, would she have a relationship with people in the martial arts circle in the future? Grandmaster Qi. Seeing Qi Xianqing frowning and being in a daze, Ning Qing was very nervous. Would she have a disaster in her life? Did Qi Xianqing feel embarrassed? You are born with a bitter life. It's not all your father's fault that your mother died. It's more because of your congenital deficiency and your body is too weak. Qi Xianqing said first. Ning Qing was slightly stunned and then became silent. Of course, she knew that it was not her father's fault, but she couldn't forgive him from the bottom of her heart. Her father made mistakes in those years. Ning Yunji also sighed softly. He did make mistakes in those years. After so many years, he hadn't remarried. On the one hand, it was for Ning Qing. On the other hand, it was because he hadn't let go. As for the future of this girl. Chapter 142. Ning Yunji's face changed slightly, and he was embarrassed. It seemed that Ning Qing's marriage was a taboo that couldn't be mentioned. Ning Qing was stunned. She didn't leave as long as her father mentioned it as before. Instead, she lowered her head and kept silent for a moment. Then she raised her head and said with complexity, "I only know that his name is Hong Jian. 10 years ago, he seemed to disappear suddenly. I can't find him no matter how hard I try. Grandmaster, your divination is magical. Can't you know his whereabouts?" Qi Xianqing couldn't help laughing and sighed, "Little girl, your grandmaster is not an immortal. Looking for a person is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It can't be known by a piece of turtle shell. But I can guarantee that you will meet each other in the future. You just need to let nature take its course." "Really?" Ning Qing's eyes immediately brightened. Ning Yunji hadn't seen such an excited look for 10 years. For a heartless man. Ning Yunji shook his head. He was old and didn't care so much about his daughter. He only hoped that they could have a good result. "What I said is true. But it depends on you whether you will be happy or sad when you meet him." Qi Xianqing smiled, but he sighed in his heart. If it was an ordinary person, he could find him with the seeking person divination. But Hong Jian had an extraordinary origin. In the future, he would have karma with the people around him. Once the divination involved himself, he couldn't see it clearly. "I have been alone all my life. Who has karma with me now is only Su Li." Qi Xianqing couldn't help but worry. Qi Xianqing couldn't help but worry. He didn't have much time to live, and he couldn't continue to lose his life. He could only try to create better practicing conditions for Su Li. Early the next morning, a long line of carriages drove out of the Qinghe town. The carriages were full of parcels, which were the property of the Su family in these years. After selling the land of the 2 byway buildings and the silk shop business, Su Huanli had millions of taels of silver for the first time. He was in a very good mood. Looking at the scenery on both sides of the official road, he seemed to experience a rebirth and transformation. The only fly in the ointment was that Su Huanli pulled a long face and heard the screams from time to time in the carriage behind him, which were made by Zhu Yan. An apology alone wouldn't be able to appease the anger in his heart for framing him and putting him in prison. Not to mention that their relationship as husband and wife over the years had long dissipated with the waves of conflict. If it were not for Su Qingtan's persuasion, he would have divorced Zhu Yan. How could he let her go to the capital with him? Ouch! Zipei, go and talk to your eldest brother. Slow down, slow down. If I go on like this, I will die of pain before I reach Yunjing. Su Zipei, who was serving on the side, immediately got up. She didn't look bored at all. Maybe Zhu Yan's performance in the inn that day made her feel a little guilty. No one knew how long this patience, which was transformed from guilt, would last. Su Qingtan was concerned about Su Li's thoughts. He was also afraid that Zhu Yan would die of pain on the road, so he ordered them to slow down and asked the accompanying mammy to send a cushion. Then Zhu Yan's screams were finally reduced. It was not a big problem for her to reach Yunjing. Ling Qinglan left a lot of confidants. All of them were seniors who reached the acquired 8th hurdle or above. In addition, with the golden signboard of the Supreme Judiciary, the robbers on the road avoided them. "Chief, are we really not going to rob them? With one look, I can tell that these people are millionaires. They have a lot of money." Bah! Did your brain grow on the body of a pig? Do you see the sign of the Supreme Judiciary on the carriage? If we rob them today, the Supreme Judiciary will send troops to destroy our nest tomorrow. If you want to rob them, you can do it alone. I still want to live for a few more years. The young robber was dumbfounded when he heard this and immediately shut his mouth. Nothing happened along the way. Under the care of Su Qingtan, Su Li not only had a carriage with Mammy Li, but also separated the luggage from the Su family. Her special position in Su Qingtan's heart was obvious, which made Su Zipei gnash her teeth with hatred. Li Yuelian also felt uncomfortable. But she also saw what happened in the past year. She knew that her son cared about Su Li very much, so she didn't dare to say anything bad about Su Li. For her, no matter what happened to Su Li, he and Qinghao finally had a good life. They would be very comfortable in the future. There was no conflict between her and Su Li, so there was no need to make trouble. In Zhu Yan's screams from time to time, there were more and more people on the desolate official road after 10 days. Su Qingtan finally saw the tower of Yunjing in the distance. The huge outline was like an ancient giant beast. He couldn't help but sigh. They finally arrived at Yunjing. Su Li opened the window and looked at the tower in the distance. She had excellent eyesight and could almost see the 3 golden characters above the gate. Yunjing City. In this life, she finally came. Su Li looked indifferent, but her heart was surging. In this life, the Yunjing City in her eyes would never be a slaughterhouse. Even if it was going to be slaughtered, it would be her. Mom, we are in Yunjing. Good days are coming. Su Zipei excitedly helped Zhu Yan to stand up and let her barely see the outside through the window. Zhu Yan was also excited, but she didn't show it. But she still couldn't help touching Su Zipei's face. I have been waiting for this day for a long time. Although they had already seen the outline of Yunjing City, the carriage team of the Su family drove for 2 hours to reach the tower. Standing at the gate and looking up, Su Huanli's mouth was so big that 2 eggs could be swallowed. He had never seen a city whose wall was dozens of feet high. It was so magnificent and terrible. Standing here, he was like a small ant. A group of bumpkins. The rich childs who lined up in front of the gate sneered. Their voices were so loud that Su Huanli heard them clearly. His ears were red with anger instantly. But here was the capital. He just came here and didn't want to make trouble for his son. After pointing for a long time, he could only say bitterly, "Ignorant boy, I won't argue with you." Seeing that Su Huanli was so timid, the rich child immediately laughed wildly. Even his maids and servants laughed with him. The guard seemed to know the rich child. They didn't come to settle the dispute. Instead, they watched the show aside. It's true that the kind of master is like the kind of dog. Ma Laosan's servant is still so unbearable. Suddenly, a calm male voice sounded behind Su Huanli. The rich child was stunned at first, and then he was angry. He shouted angrily, "Which bastard dares to scold me? Stand out!" Before he finished his words, he saw the door of the carriage behind opened. A person got off. It was Su Qingtan. Seeing the mark on the carriage, the rich child's pupils shrank. When he saw who the person was, his face changed even more. There was a strong fear in his heart. He said slowly, "I was wondering who it was. It turns out to be our Su Qingtan, the nerd Su. Just like a good-for-nothing. I'm really surprised that he could enter the Supreme Judiciary to eat and wait for death." Su Qingtan's reaction was very calm. His experience in the National Academy for more than half a year had taught him how to endure. Ling Qinglan's henchman behind him stood out at this moment and said expressionlessly, "Child Lu, if you slander the imperial court, you will be beheaded." The tone was extremely calm, but it made the rich child change his face suddenly. He was shocked and couldn't restrain himself anymore. He opened his mouth and scolded, "Don't slander me. I have always been loyal to the imperial court. How can I slander it?" Su Qingtan smiled slightly. When he was about to speak, a clear voice like that of an oriole suddenly sounded behind him. "Child Lu just said that my eldest brother could enter the Supreme Judiciary to eat and wait for death. In your eyes, is the Supreme Judiciary an institution for the imperial court officials to eat and wait for death?" While talking, Su Li walked over leisurely. Her light red skirt fluttered like red leaves in autumn. With her delicate and perfect face, she looked gorgeous. In normal times, Child Lu would be shocked by Su Li's beauty. Then he would try his best to please her, but now he was full of panic and trembled slightly. He was really stunned by Su Li's question just now. Slandering the imperial court was really punishable by death. A smell of urine suddenly spread. Su Qingtan frowned and saw a puddle of water at Lu Xing's feet. He couldn't help but shake his head slightly. He was so unbearable. He was just scared and peed directly. Su Li's little face was slightly red. She cleared her throat and quickly turned her head away. Su Qingtan couldn't help but laugh and quickly let her go back to the carriage. Boring. Brother Wang, let's go. Let's go to the city first. Su Qingtan waved his hand to the young man who helped him just now and got on the carriage. The young man glanced at Su Li's carriage with a little surprise and was secretly surprised. He had known that Su Qingtan doted on his second sister very much and often talked about how smart Su Li was. He had thought that Su Li's reputation was flattered by the Qinghe town, but he did not expect that Su Li seemed to have some ability. It was difficult for the factions in the capital to fight openly. They couldn't fight when they met. Naturally, there were many quarrels. He was influenced by Ling Qinglan and naturally learned a lot. He could easily find faults in Lu Xing's words. But Su Li just arrived in the capital, and she could quickly understand the flaws. It was really rare. I was worried that after the Su family entered the city, it would cause some trouble to the second lord, especially Su Li. Now it seems that I worried in vain. An idea flashed through his mind. The young man didn't look at the smiling guard at the gate. He waved his hand and the long carriage team immediately entered the tall city gate. The streets of Yunjing City were extremely spacious. It was enough for 10 carriages to run side by side without crowding. In addition, it was already evening, so there were not many pedestrians on the road. The Su family's motorcade was smooth all the way. They arrived at Su Qingtan's residence in Yunjing City before dark. After instructing the accompanying mammy to pack the luggage, Zhu Yan immediately chose a room to rest. The torment of the past half-month made the wound on her buttocks worsen a lot. Su Qingtan took Su Li, Li Yuelian and others to walk around. Su Qinghao finally couldn't help but shout, "Brother, this house is so small. It is not half the size of the previous one." Li Yuelian suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She pulled Su Qinghao's body and scolded him, "How, don't be rude to your brother. Every inch of land in Yunjing City is expensive. How can the Desu town compare with it? Although this house is only half the size of the previous one, in terms of value, the house in our hometown is not as good as this one." "Oh, I know, mother." Su Qingtan obviously didn't listen to her. He said perfunctorily. Then he pulled Su Qingtan and said coquettishly, "Brother, go to the martial arts field with me. You haven't played with me for a long time." Su Qingtan's eyes were helpless, but also doting. He turned back and said with a smile, "Second sister, mother, I have arranged your courtyard. It is as good as father's. I will go to play for a while. If you need anything, you can find Zhu Er." Zhu Er was his personal maid, so he always took her with him. Seeing that the relationship between the two brothers was still the same as before, Li Yuelian was gratified. She glanced at Su Li and hesitated for a moment. Then she gently held Su Li's slightly cold hand and said softly, "Come on, go to see the courtyard with me." Chapter 143. Su Li was slightly stunned and then nodded with a chuckle. For Li Yuelian, she was only a stranger in the previous life, because her sense of existence was too weak. Only her poisoning Zhu Yan's son could be called amazing. In the previous life, Zhu Yan and Su Zipei killed Li Yuelian and made him the scapegoat. Su Qingtan put down his softness and joined the crusade against Li Yuelian because of his mother's death. He completely became a puppet of Su Zipei. In this life, Zhu Yan and Su Zipei were marginalized in the Su family, but she and Li Yuelian could go to the new yard hand in hand. Her efforts were not in vain. A faint light flashed in Su Li's eyes. Now she would see what changes the old friends in Yunjing had in this life. It was a silent night. The next morning, the Su family was busy. Su Qingtan went to the morning imperial court before dawn. Su Huanli took the silver everywhere and began to plan the location of the Baiwei building. Li Yuelian took care of the family chores. Ma'am. Su Chui was invited by Su Qingtan from the temple. Su Qingtan's attitude was not good enough. She was angry and didn't want to take the power of the family from Li Yuelian. As for Zhu Yan and Su Zipei, they wouldn't dare to seize power from Li Yuelian even if they had the courage. Everyone could see that Su Qingtan had the final say in the Su family. Su Li called a coachman in front of the gate and headed for the National Academy. When the coachman heard the name of the National Academy and saw that Su Li's dress and temperament were extraordinary, he couldn't help but be in awe. He quickly took Su Li through the streets and alleys and arrived before the National Academy started. Su Li actually gave him 1 tael of silver as a thank you gift. The coachman was overjoyed and left with deep gratitude. This scene was seen by the guard at the gate of the National Academy. He couldn't help but secretly sigh that this lady was really generous. 1 tael of silver was enough to support the food expenses of an ordinary family for a month. When the guard was thinking, he saw Su Li coming over. He quickly straightened up, stopped Su Li, and reached out to her. Being generous was one thing, but what needed to be checked still had to be checked. You don't look like someone from the academy. Do you have a token? Hearing the guard's words, Su Li hesitated. Then she took out the token given by Qi Xianqing in the guard's suspicious eyes. As a result, the guard turned it over and over again, his heart filled with a strange feeling. Su Li. Never heard of it. Besides, the National Academy doesn't have this kind of token. Girl, it's a big crime to pretend to be a student of the National Academy. Don't mess around. For the sake of Su Li's beauty, the guard persuaded her kindly. Su Li secretly blamed Qi Xianqing for being unreliable. She had to pretend to be very helpless and said frankly, "Brother, to tell you the truth. This token was given to him by an elder in his family, so it must be real. Big brother, please take a few more looks and let me in. Your family elders." The guard seemed to have heard an extremely funny joke and immediately burst into laughter. "Miss, this is the National Academy. The token of the National Academy can't be given by your elders. I have already said that this token is fake. Leave quickly. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite." After that, the guard trembled slightly, and a breath of acquired 6th hurdle diffused from inside to outside. Su Li seemed to be frightened by it. She was so scared that her face turned pale and she stepped back again and again. Seeing this, the guard smiled proudly. He had just broken through to the acquired 6th hurdle and had no place to show off. Today, he showed off his power and prestige. He would tell his mother later. "Wait. Show me the token." The old guard standing on the side couldn't bear it. Young people were too aggressive and didn't know how to be cautious. He had to be careful to avoid making a big mistake. The young guard didn't dare to disobey and quickly handed over the jade pendant. This old guy was quite experienced. If he didn't give him face, he might be bullied by him for a few days. The old guard took over the jade pendant and was immediately shocked. It was a good nephrite. He had handled at least 8,000 jade pendants. He immediately recognized the quality of Su Li's jade pendant, which was at the same level as that of the lecturer of the National Academy. In a moment, the old guard's eyes turned from turbid to bright. He carefully identified the jade pendant. The style of the jade pendant was very old. Fortunately, he was the most senior guard. He quickly remembered that this was the unified jade pendant issued by the National Academy 20 years ago. But the words on the back were very new, as if they had just been engraved. The old guard was confused until he saw the two words, Suli, on the back and the very inconspicuous symbol. Hiss. The old guard's face changed greatly. He quickly came over respectfully and glanced at the confused young guard. He bowed to Suli and said respectfully, "It turns out to be Lecturer Su. I am old and dim-sighted. I didn't recognize the jade pendant in time. Please don't blame me." She was really a lecturer of the National Academy. The young guard's face turned pale when he heard this. He rushed over and knelt down, apologizing repeatedly. "Sir, I'm new here. I was blind and almost made a big mistake. I hope you can forgive me and let me go." The old guard snorted in his heart, but he couldn't bear that the young guard would be sent to be beaten. So, he also pleaded for him. At this moment, other guards who were still watching the scene suddenly saw such a reversal. They didn't dare to come over. They immediately stayed far away and didn't even dare to look at it for fear of getting into trouble. Su Li's eyes flashed and she chuckled. "What are you doing? Please get up. Those who don't know are innocent. I don't mean to blame this young man. It's just that I just came here today. The elders in my family didn't tell me what this token represents. I have to trouble you to explain it." Seeing that Su Li was so easy to talk to, the old guard was relieved. He pressed the young guard's head and saluted several times. Then he let the young guard leave. Then he personally led Su Li into the National Academy. Lecturer Su, the National Academy is the highest school in the entire Dahan country. It is also the place that all the students in the world are most eager to enter. The emperor is wise and far-sighted. He set the National Academy on the west side of the imperial city. It covers an area of thousands of hectares. He also built a national book tower to benefit future generations. The old guard chatted a little and then laughed. "Lecturer Su, with your token, you can go to the National Book Tower. And you are very idle on weekdays. There are not many courses. You are really a talkative person." While Su Li was talking, they had walked to the Vermilion Gate. The gate was closed, and a plaque was hanging crookedly on the door frame. The affiliated school. Su Li was confused. She didn't know the National Academy at all. Seeing that Su Li didn't even know the affiliated school, the old guard had to explain in a low voice, "There are too many officials and nobles in Yunjing City. Playboys are ignorant and incompetent. They can't enter the National Academy. They feel embarrassed. The pressure of the National Academy is also great, so. Then there is the affiliated school." Su Li was suddenly enlightened. She faintly understood why Qi Xianqing hid it. It turned out that he didn't want to keep a secret, but he was embarrassed to say it. In this way, wasn't the affiliated school the gathering place of the playboys in Yunjing City? Su Li's face immediately darkened. The old guard smiled and comforted her. "Miss, don't worry. Since you have the lecturer token of the affiliated school, even if those young masters are powerful, they will never dare to hurt you. This is the rule of the National Academy. Even if it is put in front of the emperor, it is reasonable. It can be said that your elders gave you a protective token and let you come to the National Academy to study at will. There are many examples like this 20 years ago. In recent years, there are few examples. Besides, the style of your token is quite old. So, the new guard doesn't recognize it." Su Li completely understood that Qi Xianqing did do what she asked him to do, and he did it perfectly. The only imperfection was, "Old man, how is the reputation of the lecturer of the affiliated school of the National Academy?" Su Li suddenly asked. The old guard immediately choked and smiled embarrassedly. He didn't dare to answer Su Li's question. I see. Su Li smiled and didn't embarrass the old guard. She gave the old guard some silver and let him leave. Then, she opened the door of the affiliated school. As soon as she entered the door, she smelled an extremely strong stench. Su Li's eyebrows twitched. She bypassed the stone screen and entered the room. Even though she had a steady mind, she couldn't help but feel cold. There was an unknown yellow substance boiling in a large pot, and a fat man who had fainted from the smoke was tied to the pot. A group of servants were covering their noses and adding firewood under the pot. On both sides of the walls were a group of well-dressed young masters, and there were almost no young ladies in sight. They were pointing at the pot in the middle of the courtyard and chatting in low voices. Su Li's sudden appearance made everyone present stunned. Even the servants who were ordered to stop adding firewood also stopped and stared at Su Li blankly. How could such a beautiful girl appear in the affiliated school? Wow! A girl actually came to the affiliated school. Which family does she come from? Did the sun rise from the west? Which family's miss is so tough that her family can't control her? Why does she have to be sent here? Why is she so unfamiliar? Get out of my way. In the noise, a tall and strong child with a lascivious face pushed away several people who stood in his way. He came over with a smile and said, "Which family does she come from? You are so beautiful. I feel itchy when I see you. Why don't you spend the night with me? I promise that I will let you have a taste of ecstasy. How about it?" As he said, the tall child was about to put his arms around Su Li's slender waist. Many playboys were furious, but they didn't dare to stop him. Such a stunner should fall into the hands of Ma Ling. He likes to abuse girls most. If she falls into his hands, she will be dead. Su Li was full of panic. It seemed that she tripped and fell to the ground, but she cleverly avoided Ma Ling's attack. Looking at Su Li's charming look, Ma Ling was so excited that his whole body was trembling. He said, "Bitch, get over here if you are sensible. Even if you are a student of the National Academy, you can't get out of my palm." "Ah!" Su Li screamed and closed her eyes. She took out a token in her hand and said, "I am a lecturer of the affiliated school." Quack! Ma Ling quickly stopped his body and stumbled and fell to the ground in fear. His face was pale as a piece of paper. It seemed that Su Li's words were the most horrible story in the world. You actually," Ma Ling stared at the token and saw the mark under the name. He was immediately scared. He didn't even say a harsh word. He quickly ran out of the yard as if he was running for his life. Other people had long been shocked. When they saw Su Li's gaze, they immediately saluted like little babies. Then they quickly left the yard like Ma Ling. They wished that they could have 2 more legs. Is the token so useful? Su Li was stunned for a moment. Then she put away the token and put down the fat man tied to the iron pot. Then she put down the things in the iron pot. She had already distinguished that the things in the iron pot were not the irrigation materials of the farmland, but those childs who had nothing to do after eating and cooking a pile of medicinal materials randomly. They made a smell of excrement, but it was not poisonous. When the temperature was low, the stench would naturally dissipate. But Chapter 144. Tang Lei woke up slowly. Looking at the sky and the sun, he felt cold on his back. It took him a long time to realize that he was not in the clinic, but in the affiliated school. "I'm fine." Tang Lei touched his whole body and felt no pain. Ma Ling and others didn't beat him today. Thinking that he was hung on the iron pot by Ma Ling and almost ate shit, Tang Lei couldn't help but retch. He didn't eat anything this day and only vomited some acid water. But he felt much better. Why are they all gone? Tang Lei got up quickly and touched his big belly, which seemed to be 10 months pregnant. He entered the room with a puzzled look. As soon as he came in, he felt that he was firmly locked by someone. He was scared and immediately left the room. He waved his hand and said, "I'll go now." Su Li shouted in a low voice, "Come back." Tang Lei's feet trembled, but he stopped. He slowly looked back. A face came into his sight, and he immediately became a pervert. Oh my! Whose daughter was she? Why was she more beautiful than Wu Shuxiu? After this thought flashed in his mind, Tang Lei suddenly realized something. He couldn't help but look back at the familiar stone screen. Was it the affiliated school? There was a girl in the affiliated school, what the hell? After a while, Tang Lei was scared and half of his buttocks leaned against the chair. His eyes didn't leave the jade token on the table. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He should have known why Ma Ling and others ran away. It turned out that there was a new lecturer in the affiliated school. Oh my God! When Tang Lei thought that the beautiful girl sitting in front of him was the legendary lecturer of the affiliated school, he was so scared that he hid in the soil again and didn't dare to show up again. Lecturer. Lecturer Su. Tang Lei forced a smile that he thought was the most respectful. I really didn't do anything wrong. Please forgive me this time. Su Li tilted her head and thought that Tang Lei was a coward. How could he do anything wrong? Tell me, why are you so afraid of the lecturers of the affiliated school? Su Li tapped the table with her fingertips and asked the first question softly. The fat boy immediately widened his eyes, which were smaller than the crack of the door. You don't know? Yes. Su Li smiled and showed her white teeth. Tang Lei was so scared that his pupils became slack and he almost ran away. Su Li was the lecturer of the affiliated school. He felt that Su Li was a tigress who was about to choose people to eat. Lecturer, if I tell you, will you not teach the students today? Tang Lei almost cried. Then he remembered that Su Li knew that the lecturers of the affiliated school didn't have a good reputation. It was because the reputation of the lecturers of the affiliated school was not very good. No, it can be said that he is notorious, especially among the students of the affiliated school. He is no less than Lord Qingong of the Ministry of Penalty. Tang Lei wiped his cold sweat. Seeing that Su Li didn't respond to his words, he continued. More than 20 years ago, there were many lecturers in the affiliated school, and they were all talented students who couldn't even be taught by the National Academy. They could only learn by themselves. But some of them were not powerful enough to frighten playboys. They were often bullied and even tortured by playboys. Then, extremely terrible things happened. 20 years ago, there were many lecturers of the affiliated school. They were so talented that the National Academy couldn't teach them. They could only learn by themselves. But some of them were not powerful enough to scare the playboys. They were often bullied and even tortured by the playboys. Then, something terrible happened. The National Academy suffered a heavy loss. The emperor was furious. Finally, he changed the rules of the affiliated school under the suggestion of the royal preceptor. If there were playboys who bullied the lecturers of the affiliated school, they would be exiled or beheaded. Such rules immediately made the families who had just lost their children angry. They jointly impeached the royal preceptor. The emperor was furious. He killed several arrogant officials. Then he stopped. As soon as the rules were changed, the lecturers of the affiliated school immediately became arrogant. They even bullied the playboys. The playboys were angry but dared not to say anything. They could only bear it. But even so, the number of lecturers of the affiliated school was not much. In recent years, there were only 1 or 2 lecturers, or even none. The emperor was furious. He even hinted that the lecturers of the affiliated school should punish the playboys. It didn't matter if they were disabled. The emperor would bear it for them. Then he gave them very favorable conditions. Under such temptation, another lecturer of the affiliated school finally appeared. He was the disciple of the royal preceptor. He was a young man who seemed to be 25 or 26 years old. The young man seemed to be particularly good at studying punishment. He tortured the playboys in different ways every day. But there were no scars. Sometimes he even let the playboys test poison for him. The whole affiliated school was full of complaints. They complained that they didn't want to go to the National Academy. But those families didn't want to lose face. If they knew that their sons were driven out of the National Academy, they would lose face. They said that they couldn't go home even if they died in the affiliated school. It lasted for 3 years. All the playboys in Yunjing City lived in misery. Every day when they opened their eyes, they thought about how to be tortured by the lecturer. Some people even went crazy. But the young man's medical skills were superb. He soon found that those people pretended to be crazy. Then the punishment was more severe. After several punishment methods became famous, they even aroused the interest of Lord Qin. Lord Qin introduced them into the Ministry of Penalty. Fortunately, the lecturer left Yunjing a year ago. I don't know where he went. There is no lecturer in the affiliated school. The playboys are angry again. As he said, Tang Lei was sad and angry. Only 1 year later, there was a new lecturer in the affiliated school. Oh my God! It was desperate enough to be bullied by Ma Ling and others. Another Su Li. How was he going to let them live? After hearing what Tang Lei said, Su Li was thinking. If she guessed right, the young man that Tang Lei said was probably the disciple of Qi Xianqing and her senior fellow apprentice. Qi Xianqing once mentioned it, but he didn't say the name of this person. The time when this person left coincided with that of Qi Xianqing. They almost left at the same time. It shouldn't be a coincidence. They went to do something together. However, the old guy said that he would arrange a position for me to study peacefully. How could it be low-key? It couldn't be any more high-profile. It seemed that he also intended to let me enter the vision of the Dongfang family and experience more experience under the protection of the Dongfang family. Su Li looked indifferent. Qi Xianqing would never expect that his disciple would be an old monster who lived longer than him. The so-called experience was really boring. However, it was not a bad thing to have such a layer of identity as a cover. At least on the surface, she didn't need to worry that the playboy that Su Zipei used would do something bad to her. Thinking of this, Su Li flicked her fingers. A light green elixir was shot into Tang Lei's mouth. What did you feed me? Tang Lei was frightened. Sure enough, those who could be the lecturers of the affiliated school were not good people. He was obviously well behaved, but Su Li even fed him poison. In addition to poison, Tang Lei couldn't think of what the green elixir could be. Su Li smiled and said, "How can you misunderstand me like this? I am not like my senior fellow apprentice. I am kind-hearted." Senior fellow apprentice. Tang Lei's scalp was numb. He was a senior fellow apprentice. How could he be kind-hearted? Before he said anything, suddenly there was a violent roar in his stomach. It was like that a train ran over his stomach. His abdomen immediately cramped. My stomach. Tang Lei let out an earth-shattering howl and immediately ran in the direction of the toilet. Su Li watched Tang Lei leave with interest. She clearly knew that there was a hidden poison in his body that was difficult to detect. It was really strange. Such a weak child should not have a strong background. Why did he kill people in such a hidden way? Under this hidden poison, Tang Lei would gradually gain weight. Then his body would have various small problems because of excessive obesity. Finally, he would be fat like a bull. His blood would collapse and he would die painfully. His body would be rotten like mud. It seemed that he died of obesity caused by excessive gluttony. Judging from his obesity, Tang Lei had been taking poison for at least 10 years. There were only a few months left before the onset of the disease. Su Li sat down again. She picked up the brush and dipped it in ink. Then she wrote down a line of words and made some changes. The elixir that she gave to Tang Lei could not detoxify the poison. She just arrived in Yunjing. The things of the Linli building had not been sent over yet. So, she didn't have many elixirs with her. The elixir just now was just a relatively simple detoxification elixir. At most, it could wash away a layer of grease on Tang Lei's body and make him thinner. It could delay the onset of the disease. It's really inconvenient that Feng Yuan and others are not around. Su Li sighed. Fortunately, Qi Xianqing arranged a place for her in the affiliated school. It could be a temporary secret place. Senior fellow apprentice also left a lot of medicinal materials here. Many of them were quite rare. It must be a gift for her junior sister apprentice whom she had never met. After checking the medicine cabinet, Su Li nodded with satisfaction. She said, "It saves some time. The remaining medicinal materials are more than enough to refine 10 furnaces of auxiliary medicine of a higher grade." After the playboy of the affiliated school returned to his family, the news that there was one more lecturer in the affiliated school spread quickly. Even people in the imperial palace heard it. Hearing that the emperor knew it, he immediately laughed loudly and said that the teacher didn't deceive him. Su Li's identity was immediately exposed. She was the youngest apprentice of the royal preceptor, that was, the junior sister apprentice of the emperor. Who dared to hurt her? After many families secretly collected information, they found that the Su family was just a nobody. They just moved here from a remote place. Except that Su Qingtan was involved with the third prince, there was nothing unusual in the family. This kind of ant-like small family actually produced a true phoenix. The families who found the information were really angry and hated Su Li. They couldn't wait to drive Su Li away. But Su Li came suddenly without any sign. Even the emperor didn't know it until Su Li entered the affiliated school. It was too late to stop her. At the same time, in the courtyard of the East House of the Ling General's mansion, the leading rich and powerful family in Yunjing, Ling Li looked at the information he just got. He was expressionless, but his heart was in turmoil. The Su family moved to Yunjing. Was it a coincidence? Or was it Su Li's original intention? Thinking of that night, the girl with a cold expression handed out the Zijin token and left with him. Ling Li felt complicated. Su Qingtan had become his woman. If she knew it, would she be angry? Subconsciously, Ling Li's right hand tightened. The paper was slightly wrinkled. Ling Xian, who served beside him, stared at him and said, "Child, what are you worried about?" According to the information, it was a girl, and she was the apprentice of the royal preceptor. She was not a friend. Why did the child care about a girl so much? Subconsciously, Ling Xian was vigilant. Ling Li frowned slightly. Before he spoke, there was a sudden report from the door, "Child." Child Tang came to visit. It seemed that he was in a hurry. Our servants didn't dare to stop him. He has already arrived at the main hall. As soon as the voice died away, Ling Li in the room immediately showed an evil face. He stretched out his hand and pulled the crown on his head. Then he took 2 steps and collapsed on the wheelchair behind him. Chapter 145. Brotherly. Brotherly. As soon as Ling Xian pushed Ling Li out of the study, she saw Tang Lei, who was aggrieved like a little wife, rush to the wheelchair. From a distance, it was like a meatball in clothes was rolling to the wheelchair and was going to crush it. Ling Li didn't panic at all. He picked his nose with disgust. Then he saw Tang Lei kneeling down in front of him skillfully. Two fat and greasy hands slapped on Ling Li's legs. Tang Lei cried with tears and snot, "Brotherly, you have to seek justice for me." Ling Li raised his eyebrows and lazily asked, "What? What did the bastard of the Ma family do to you again?" He sighed in his heart that Tang Lei was too weak. He watched him being bullied since childhood. Tang Lei, the eldest son of the Grand Commandant's mansion, didn't say anything and didn't dare to tell the elders of the family. However, he could understand it. After all, the old guy in the Tang's mansion always favored a smarter little bastard. Fatty Tang was the eldest son, but his status in the family was very low. The old Grand Commandant was afraid that people would gossip about him because he was the eldest son. So, he sent Fatty Tang to the affiliated school to save face. If Fatty Tang said it, he would be beaten again. No one would vent his anger for him. Sometimes when Ling Li was bored, he would help Tang Lei to teach Ma Ling and others a lesson. Fatty Tang admired Ling Li very much and regarded him as the boss. If Ling Li mentioned Ma Ling in normal times, Tang Lei would show an angry expression, but he didn't this time. Tang Lei stood up with a sad face and patted his belly. "Brotherly, can't you see anything?" Ling Li rolled his eyes and scolded, "I'm not a rabbit, and I'm not blind. I don't want to see your lard." As he spoke, he waved his hand. Whether it was his expression or his tone, he was the living embodiment of a spoiled hedonistic son of a rich family. Tang Lei was more aggrieved when he heard that. He shook his belly and said, "Brotherly, look. I've really lost a lot of weight. In the past, I could still feel it when I shook my stomach, but now the meat has become solid. The meat that I ate with my own ability is gone just like that." Hearing the fat man's repeated emphasis, Ling Li finally glanced at Tang Lei impatiently. But this glance made him slightly serious, and a chill rose in his heart. Tang Lei was indeed thin, and abnormally thin. He had just seen Tang Lei yesterday, but he had lost at least 15 kilograms of meat today, which was too abnormal. Seeing that Ling Li was a little more serious, Tang Lei finally felt that he found an outlet to vent. He knelt down and hugged Ling Li's legs, crying loudly, "It's all because of Su Li, the lecturer of the affiliated school. She gave me poison when we met. It's so cruel. Brotherly, you have to help me." Tang Lei cried so hard that his tears and snot were all wiped on Ling Li's clothes. The scene was so beautiful that Ling Xian couldn't help but turn her back quietly to let her eyes suffer less. Ling Li was shocked when he heard it. Su Li. Su Li. She did it so quickly, and it was even to the fat man. He had already understood Su Li's poison. Of course, he admired Su Li's medical skills more. There were few people in the world who could make his mood fluctuate, but Su Li was the one who made him worried and couldn't sleep for several days. "Fat man, tell me, how did Su Li torture you?" Ling Li couldn't help but ask. Even he didn't realize that when he asked this question, he couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. It seemed that it was a pleasant thing to be in the same city with Su Li. Tang Lei only thought that Ling Li was laughing at him. But facing Ling Li, who only regarded him as a friend, he was not angry. Instead, he talked about the details of his encounter with Su Li. First, she asked about the lecturer of the affiliated school, and then she gave you a green poison pill? Ling Li touched his chin and was lost in thought. He didn't get along with Su Li for a long time, but he also knew that the woman would not poison people for no reason. Instead, she was extremely principled. Since Tang Lei helped her solve her doubts, she should give him the corresponding reward. Why did she give him a laxative? Seeing that Ling Li worried about him, Tang Lei was moved. He couldn't help but interrupt, "Brotherly, I feel much better after telling you. It's better to forget it. Although I lost weight after taking the laxative, I also feel much lighter. I'm not as heavy as before. If things get serious, you can't control Su Li. At that time, even old lady can't protect you," Tang Lei said. He was more and more worried that Ling Li would do something absurd again. Ling Li was the first playboy in Yunjing for a reason. One of the most famous things was that he almost tarnished Wu Xiuxiu, the daughter of the Wu family. That thing was so serious that the Ling family and the Wu family almost used troops because of it. Finally, it was settled by the emperor. It was a big crime to tarnish a person's innocence. But the Ling family fought for the Dehan country for generations. There were countless casualties. Now there were only two boys, Ling Ping and Ling Li. Ling Li was poisoned in his childhood and his legs were disabled. Then, he abandoned himself to despair and gradually became a playboy. The emperor was furious at that time. He ordered the supreme judiciary to find the murderer. But after so many years, the supreme judiciary still couldn't find the whereabouts of the murderer. In this regard, the emperor felt guilty for Ling Li. If he hadn't been poisoned, Ling Li should have become a good soldier in the army like his brother Ling Ping. Therefore, even if Ling Li made a terrible mistake, the emperor finally turned a blind eye and didn't punish him. Ling Li seemed to be scared and restrained a lot. He even went to his favorite brothel less often. At that time, Mrs. Gu felt gratified. But it didn't take long for Ling Li to return to his old ways. He ate, drank, gambled, and played with a group of playboys all day long. Mrs. Gu was so angry that she stayed in bed for half a month. Finally, she completely gave up on Ling Li and let him be. But for the face of the Ling family, she still sent him to the affiliated school. However, as the #1 playboy in Yunjing City, he couldn't be restricted by the affiliated school. He could go to the affiliated school if he wanted to, and he didn't have to go if he didn't want to. He was not restrained like other playboys. Tang Lei couldn't help admiring Ling Li when he thought of the glorious deeds of Ling Li in these years. Brotherly was really a role model of our generation. You said that your body was relaxed after you took the elixir. Ling Li ignored the latter half of Tang Lei's words and said with a smile on his face, "Fatty, I think that the elixir that Su Li gave you was not poison, but to help you recuperate. You are too fat and weak. Now it seems that you are in good health. I think it must be the elixir that Su Li gave you. You should blame her wrongly. You shouldn't." Tang Lei thought that Ling Li would say a few words of loyalty. Unexpectedly, he flattered Su Li in a twinkling of an eye. Tang Lei wanted to cry but had no tears. But to be honest, after listening to Ling Li's words, he really felt that Su Li was different from the previous cold-faced young lecturer. Thinking of this, he touched his round head and said with a silly smile, "It seems that I misunderstood her." But seriously. Tang Lei came over and his small eyes were shining. He said, "Su Li is really beautiful. She is even more beautiful than Wu Xiuxiu. Brotherly, don't you boast that you have seen all the beauties in the world. I didn't expect that I would surpass you one day." Tang Lei showed an expression of, "You didn't expect it." Ling Li didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If he said that he not only knew Su Li but also slept in her bed for a month, would he go crazy? Thinking of this, Ling Li didn't find that he had a little complacency. But Ling Xian noticed that the master seemed to care about the girl named Su Li very much. After drinking tea in the yard, Tang Lei left with a happy face. His mood had become bright. Because of Ling Li, even if he was bullied by Ma Ling and others every day, he didn't feel desperate. After Tang Lei left, the happy atmosphere in the yard was swept away and replaced by seriousness. Ling Li's smile slowly disappeared. He got up from the wheelchair and went back to the room without saying a word. The whole Yunjing city seemed to be calm, but the undercurrent was turbulent. The emperor was old and had many princes. The position of the crown prince had not been determined yet. A bloody storm was inevitable. This was an internal trouble. The Nanjiang country quelled the internal strife, and the radical royal family gained the upper hand. After the reorganization, there would inevitably be a war, and the Dehan country would be the first to bear the brunt. This was an external trouble. In Yunjing City, there were many people in the martial arts circle. Because a treasure of the martial arts circle would be auctioned in Yunjing City. Many people would die before and after the auction. At this time, Su Li's family suddenly moved to Yunjing. Ling Li couldn't help but bow his head and frown. It was really a headache. After Su Li sorted out the things left by the senior fellow apprentice in the affiliated school, she closed the door and went to the National Book Tower. She was now in the dark and urgently needed to know the families in Yunjing City and the royal family of the Dehan country. When she went there, it was almost dark. Su Li didn't stay for a long time, and the National Book Tower was closed. She only read less than half of the information of Yunjing City, but she knew the general situation. There were so many first-grade officials. The families behind them were naturally the real rich and powerful families in Yunjing City. First, General Ling's mansion where Ms. Gu lived. Although Ms. Gu no longer served in the imperial court, she was a legendary figure in the Dehan country. Naturally, she couldn't be treated as an ordinary person. Second, the Ma family in the right prime minister's mansion. Third, the Tang family in the left prime minister's mansion. Fourth, the Wu family in the general's mansion. Both of them were first-grade officials and had great power in the imperial court. They were from the same rich and powerful families. Their status was no less than the royal family. Then there were the Ma family in the censorate and so on. The introduction was not detailed. Su Li roughly read it. In the night, she disguised herself and went to the Tianya house. Then she knew the overall situation. When she saw the description of Ling Li's file in the Tianya house, she couldn't help but feel strange. It turned out that he had been pretending to be disabled. Did he become disabled after he was seen through in the previous life? Seeing all kinds of absurd things that Ling Li had done over the years to deceive people, Su Li couldn't imagine what kind of mood such a gentleman had to ruin his reputation. After laughing, Su Li's eyes became clear again. She knew Ling Li's intention at a glance. He is really smart. Although the Ling family lost its halo, it was still in danger because of its great achievements. The men of the Ling family died in the battlefield one after another. It was quite strange. Ling Li deliberately showed weakness, but in fact, he wanted to protect himself. The emperor's family was the most ruthless. No one knew how the emperor remembered General Ling and how he was afraid of the Ling family. Thinking of this, Su Li put Ling Li's file aside and began to understand the complex situation in Yunjing carefully. At the same time, an unknown person bought a lot of intelligence of Yunjing City from the Tianya house, especially the intelligence of the Ling family. The news came to Ling Li's yard. "Master, there hasn't been anyone to investigate your file for a long time. Did someone find out your real identity?" Ling Xian read the note and couldn't help but ask with worry. Ling Li took the note with 2 fingers and put it on the candle to burn it into ashes. He didn't answer Ling Xian's question. Instead, he sat back in his seat and smiled deeply. He said that he would break the predestined relationship with Ling Li, but why did he show his scroll? Chapter 146. Su Qingtan followed Ling Qinglan to run around in the past 2 days. He was very busy. When he was free, he knew that Su Li became the legendary lecturer of the affiliated school. And Qi Xianqing used to be the royal preceptor. Even though Su Qingtan had tried his best to guess the identity of Qi Xianqing, he was still shocked by the word royal preceptor. At the same time, he was happy for Su Li. With the protection of the identity of the lecturer of the affiliated school, he didn't need to worry that his second sister would be bullied after he left Yunjing. There is nothing to do today. You can go back and prepare. After changing his official uniform, Su Qingtan came to the Supreme Judiciary. He found that Ling Qinglan wore casual clothes and smiled lightly. Prepare for what? Su Qingtan was confused. I forgot to tell you that today is the day that General Ling Ping returns to the imperial court. General Ling repelled the army of the Nanjiang country and made great achievements. The emperor is going to hold a banquet for him tonight. This is a good opportunity for you to get to know Lord Qingong. Don't miss it. Ling Qinglan reminded him carefully. He knew that the person Su Qingtan admired was the cruel official who was incorruptible all his life. So, he deliberately took it out and said, "Tonight, there will be a lot of daughters of noble families. You are old enough to get married. Why don't you go and have a look?" Su Qingtan rolled his eyes and thought, "You are 4 years older than me. Why don't I see you get married and have children?" However, when he heard that Lord Qingong would go, Su Qingtan also wanted to go and have a look. He also asked Su Li to go and see the world. If Su Li went to that occasion with her current identity, she would not be looked down upon. Seeing Ling Qinglan humming an unknown tune and leaving, Su Qingtan felt strange. It was obvious that young General Ling Ping won the war. Why was Ling Qinglan so happy as if he won the war? He really didn't understand. Near noon, the returning troops finally appeared at the gate of the city. Ling Ping, who was wearing armor, was on the horse in the front. He looked cold and solemn. As soon as he entered the city, people in Yunjing City cheered enthusiastically. "General Ling, welcome back with victory. General Ling. General Ling," the enthusiastic people came to the ground one after another. Their cheers were like waves. The soldiers who entered the city were excited and their eyes were wet. It seemed that their sweat and blood on the battlefield were answered. Ling Ping was expressionless, and his heart was also as calm as water, even a little angry. Ever since he had taken command of the army, he had always been victorious and had never suffered a defeat. Some people even said that he was the reincarnation of his grandfather, a natural-born god of war. But only he himself knew that every time he won, he would win in an inexplicable manner. Sometimes, even though he had clearly lost, he would wake up the next day to find that the enemy was suddenly unable to withstand a single blow. It was the same this time. He was clearly no match for the army of Nanjiang country because the difference in number was too big. But on the second day, the enemy was poisoned and had no strength. They were defeated by the small army led by him and had to retreat. It was fine if it happened once or twice, but he had been in the army for several years and fought no less than dozens of battles. Every time, he felt as if he was being helped by God. This made him understand that there was an extremely powerful unknown force secretly helping him. But now, the Ling family was alone. They had no allies, and their relationship with the Wu family was like fire and water. He had been ambushed many times in the army, all by the hands of the Wu family. In the end, he had been rescued, but he had never seen the face of the person who had saved him. He didn't even know if the person was a man or a woman. This matter had always been a secret in Ling Ping's heart. He didn't even tell his mother and grandmother. "Madam, old madam. Second master is back. Second master is back." When he was thinking, Ling Ping's horse had stopped at the gate of the Ling house. At this moment, the Ling house was decorated with lanterns and streamers. When the servant waiting in front of the door saw Ling Ping, he immediately shouted with joy and reported inside. Ling Ping hadn't been home for more than half a year. He couldn't stop the excitement in his eyes. He took off his helmet and threw it to the adjutant. Then he quickly entered the house. After a few steps, he saw his mother walking quickly with the help of his grandmother. Both of them were happy and excited. "Mother! Grandma!" Ling Ping shouted. He strode over and knelt down. He said, "I didn't let father and grandfather down. I came back with a great victory. Good boy, get up." Mrs. Gu burst into tears and held Ling Ping tightly. Chiu Meng also wiped her tears. There were only 2 males left in the family, and one was disabled. Ling Ping went to the battlefield. God knew how worried they were. "Ping, you must be very tired. Go in to take a bath, change clothes, and have a rest. Mother and I are here. It's not too late to talk after you have a good rest." Chiu Meng wiped the dust on Ling Ping's face. She looked distressed and said, "My poor son. He is only 20 years old, but he has to shoulder the heavy burden of the Ling family." "Mother, I am not tired." Ling Ping felt the care of his close relatives. It seemed that the tiredness on the road was swept away. He smiled warmly and said, "I haven't entered the imperial palace to meet the emperor. When I come back, I will talk with you about the family. By the way, where is Brother Li? Why didn't I see him?" Mrs. Gu's face darkened. She hit the ground with her crutch and said, "That little bastard went out with the little fatty of the Tang family in the morning. I haven't seen him yet. He is getting more and more outrageous. Since you, as his brother, have returned, you should properly discipline him." Ling Ping heard the words and smiled. He didn't feel disappointed. He said, "It's good that Brother Li is happy. As long as he doesn't do evil things, I can't blame him. It is a blessing for him to spend his life in peace." Mrs. Gu was helpless. The 2 brothers had a good relationship since childhood. Now Ling Ping grew up and had his own ideas. She couldn't control him. After taking a bath and changing clothes, Ling Ping changed into official clothes and went to the imperial palace in a sedan chair. He had received the routine rewards many times. He was excited at the beginning, but now he was calm. The emperor seemed to see that Ling Ping was tired. He laughed and let him go. He only told him to attend the banquet at the waterside pavilion in the south of the city in the evening. Grandma, be gentle. Your grandson's ears are going to fall off." Back to the Ling mansion, Ling Ping finally heard Ling Li's familiar and exaggerated voice. Seeing that the boy was pulled by his grandma and howled, he couldn't help but laugh. He walked over and said, "Grandma, if you don't let go, Brother Li's ears will fall off." Mrs. Gu was so angry that she snorted and put down Ling Li. She pointed at him and scolded, "Look at your brother. He went to the brothel at the age of 16. He smelled of rouge. Why did the Ling family have such a little bastard like you? I'm so angry." Ling Ping understood that when he entered the imperial palace, Grandma specially sent someone to find Ling Li. Finally, she found him in the brothel alley. "Grandma, don't scold him. I will teach him a lesson." Ling Ping pushed the wheelchair and took Ling Li away quickly. Mrs. Gu was so angry that she jumped. "Ha ha 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 ha, second brother, you didn't see the top courtesan of the Hongyan house. She is so beautiful. I will take you to see her later." In the yard, Ling Ping saw Ling Xian put down the wine and dishes and stepped back to leave. He was amazed. He didn't expect that the girl became so beautiful after half a year. It was really hard for her to follow his second brother. Ling Ping straightened Ling Li's hair crown. As before, he knocked on Ling Li's knee and asked softly, still no response. Ling Li shook his head indifferently and said lazily, "Second brother, it has been so many years. Don't you find it annoying that you are still doing this?" Ling Ping's breath trembled slightly. He smiled bitterly and said, "I can't change my old habit. Perhaps your second brother's knocking will really be heard by the heavens and allow you to recover." Ling Li's eyes flashed with a vague light, but he said in a flirtatious way, "God has eyes. Why didn't I see it? If it really has eyes, will the Ling family be like this?" Ling Ping was speechless and only smiled bitterly. They were silent for a moment. Ling Ping suddenly said, "I will take you to the banquet in the evening. You are not young anymore. It's time." "Don't." Ling Li immediately interrupted and said, "It is the blind date arranged by the emperor for you. Why should I take part in it? Besides, I want to be happy for a few years. Let's talk about marrying a wife later. You can see it clearly." Ling Ping smiled. It was said that his brother was a playboy. Not only his legs were disabled, but also his brain was not good. He often made trouble for the Ling mansion. Only when he talked and laughed with his second brother could he find that his second brother was not really a playboy. But he was disabled. It seemed that he had no other choice but to be a playboy. The Ling family had been generals for generations. If his second brother became a scholar, it was undoubtedly an insult. "But second brother, I heard from Fatty Tang that the girl named Su Li is very beautiful. You must leave him for me, your younger brother. If any other lackeys fancy him, you must let me know." Ling Li said and giggled. It seemed that he thought of some extremely beautiful things. Ling Ping couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. "I just came back. You want to make trouble for me? I heard that Su Li has an extraordinary background. Don't be like Wu Xiuxiu. Otherwise, no matter how much I love you, I will never help you this time." Ling Li shrank his neck and smiled embarrassedly. "I know, second brother. I don't dare to do that. I was really scared at that time. In fact, I didn't intend to touch Wu Xiuxiu. Wu Xiuxiu automatically got into my arms. Alas. I have said this many times. You don't believe me. Forget it." Ling Li waved his hand with flagging interest and let Ling Ping leave. Ling Ping shook his head slightly and left the yard. This silly boy. Of course he believed him. His second brother was not a fool. How could he not know the consequences of insulting Wu Xiuxiu? It was just that his second brother's image of a debauchee was deeply ingrained in people's hearts. He could only suffer in silence. In order to deal with the Ling family, the Wu family has been doing everything. They can even sacrifice the reputation of their daughter. Ling Ping sneered several times. Ling Ping sneered several times. The Wu family would come back tonight. He wanted to see what new tricks they had. In the yard, the smile on Ling Li's face gradually faded. When Ling Xian confirmed that Ling Ping had left, he stood up from the wheelchair and returned to the study. At this moment, Ling Mo, dressed in black, was sitting quietly in the room. He closed his eyes and breathed faintly. Ling Ping was talking and laughing with Ling Li in the yard and didn't find him. Noticing that Ling Li came in, Ling Mo opened his eyes and stood up. He respectfully reported, "Qinglan's information is good. I took people to destroy the small stronghold of the Lianshi cult and seized a large number of bone-softening powder. I scattered it to the army of the Nanjiang country and helped Ling Ping turn defeat into victory. Second brother has doubts in these years. He has been silent all the time. It's really hard for him." Ling Li took Ling Mo's handwritten letter and read it. He couldn't help but laugh. Qinglan is actually a hands-off shopkeeper. Does he really want to train Su Qingtan as his successor? Ling Imo hesitated and asked, his injury. Ling Li snorted and said, something must have gone wrong. He still refuses to tell me. He thinks that his life belongs to himself. Is he ready to quit? Ling Mo's face tightened and he said, Master. Chapter 147. A Miracle Working Doctor. Ling Mo was confused and said in a low voice, Qi Xianqing is back. But he is the royal preceptor. It's unclear whether he is an enemy or a friend. How can he treat Qinglan? Ling Li shook his head and didn't say anything. He picked up a file and threw it to Ling Imo. Ling Imo took it and opened it. Suddenly, his face changed dramatically. The weird girl actually came to Yunjing. Ling Xian listened on the side. How could she not understand that they were talking about Su Li? And it seemed that both the master and Ling Imo had contact with Su Li. Thinking of this, Ling Xian suddenly said, she is the apprentice of Qi Xianqing. She can't distinguish friend or foe. Master, you'd better be careful. Ling Imo looked back at Ling Xian, whose beautiful eyes were full of worry. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that it was too late to say this. The girl not only knew the origin of him and Ling Li when they met, but also behaved very strangely. It seemed that Su Li had a deep relationship with the young master. But as the sword in the young master's hand, he didn't listen to some things that he shouldn't listen to. He was not very clear about the relationship between Su Li and the young master, but he was sure that Su Li would not be the young master's enemy. The girl worked hard to make the body immune to all poisons for master. If she was the enemy, it would be ridiculous. I'm sure that she will not be my enemy, Ling Li asserted. Ling Xian was worried, but she didn't dare to refute. She had a hunch that if she questioned the identity of Su Li again, master would be angry. The people around her haven't come yet. Although she has the identity of the lecturer of the affiliated school to cover for her recently, it's hard to guarantee that she won't be plotted against. Ling Imo, send someone to protect her secretly. Ling Li walked around and gave an order. Ling Imo suddenly felt strange. Did the girl who was full of poison need to be protected? Besides, Master, did you forget that you annoyed her and were driven out of the valley by her? Ling Imo thought about these questions for a few times, but he couldn't ask them. Instead, he obediently carried out the order. He was calculating how high the cultivation of the people he needed to send to prevent Su Li from noticing the people in the dark. Ling Xian saw Ling Imo obediently leave. She gently closed her mouth and her eyes were deep. No one knew what she was thinking. In the Su house. Big brother, do I have to go to the banquet tonight? Su Li heard that Su Qingtan asked her to prepare clothes. She couldn't help but be slightly stunned. During the day, she heard that Ling Ping of the Ling family came back victorious. There would be a small banquet in the evening. Only the childs and daughters of prominent aristocratic families or officials of the imperial court were qualified to attend. Su Qingtan smiled gently and touched Su Li's nose. He said, "Silly girl, you are now the lecturer of the affiliated school and the junior sister apprentice of the emperor. In terms of status, who can compare to you? I, your big brother, am the one who barely meets the standard. It's all thanks to you that I was invited." "Big brother, don't say that." Su Li was embarrassed and said, "I heard that it was a blind date for General Ling Ping. I don't want to get married yet." Su Qingtan was stunned at first, and then he laughed and said, "Girl, you haven't shown your position yet. You are Qi Xianqing's last disciple. If you don't want to marry, no one can force you. Tonight, you can go there to see the scenery of the waterside pavilion. In fact, if I didn't hear that Lord Chen Gong had returned, I wouldn't have bothered to go. Ha! Chen Gong. Su Li's eyes flashed. She had only been in Yunjing for a few days, but she had heard this name more than once. She must check the details of this person later. Her big brother worshipped him, but others said that he was more like a fierce tiger. Su Qingtan told Su Li to dress up quickly, and then he returned to his room to change clothes. Squeak, the wooden door made a light sound. Su Li heard the sound and looked back. She saw that Su Zipei appeared at the door as soon as Su Qingtan left. Su Zipei pinched the corner of her clothes with her hands and looked embarrassed. "Third sister, come in and tell me what you want." Su Li smiled and said slowly. Su Zipei was relieved. She walked in and gently closed the door. But she couldn't stop the crazy jealousy and hatred in her heart. Until now, she found that she had fallen to the point that every word and deed needed Su Li's approval. Su Li came to Yunjing City for only 3 days, but her reputation had spread all over Yunjing. She was the last disciple of Qi Xianqin, the royal preceptor. Her beauty surpassed Wu Xiuxiu, the former first beauty in Yunjing, and she became the new first beauty in Yunjing. Not only that, she became the lecturer of the affiliated school and the first genius of the National Academy. Why? Why did all the good things fall on her head in just 3 days, and what about him? Except for the half of the jade pendant, there was nothing. Why did Su Li still get such glory without the jade pendant? Compared with Su Li, she was like a little mouse that stole something. She probed carefully on the edge, but she never got any result. Phew. Su Zipei took a breath and reluctantly emerged from the jealousy and hatred. She begged, "Second sister, I also want to go to the banquet to see the world. Can you take me with you?" Su Li looked up and down at Su Zipei, who had dressed up very delicately. A jade pendant loomed on her waist. It was extraordinary. It seemed that Su Zipei didn't stop to inquire about the news when she dressed up Zhu Yan. The news of today's banquet just came out. She couldn't wait to hook up with a rich husband? In the previous life, Su Qingtan didn't come to Yunjing so early. She didn't know how Su Zipei hooked up with Wu Jin, who was far away in Yunjing, and even let her biological father recognize her as his daughter. But it didn't matter. In this life, she had enough time to observe. As long as Su Zipei wanted to get in touch with the rich and powerful families in Yunjing, there would always be flaws. But today, Su Li looked apologetic and said bitterly, "Third sister, it's my limit to go to the waterside pavilion with the eldest brother. If I take you with me, people may think that the Su family doesn't know etiquette. I just promised the eldest brother, and I can't go back on my word. Next time, I will give the opportunity to you next time. This time, I can only." Su Zipei's face was extremely distorted when she saw Su Li's sincere and guilty look. She didn't see that Su Li was acting, but she was so sincere, which made her even more disgusted. Then, a more manic anger rose from the bottom of her heart. Without thinking, Su Zipei subconsciously slapped the beautiful face in front of her. Crack! The crisp sound resounded through the room. Su Zipei touched her right face blankly and looked at Su Qingtan, who suddenly appeared in front of her. She didn't even notice when the former arrived. Su Qingtan pulled Su Li, who looked aggrieved, behind him. His face was full of anger, like a lion that was about to bite people. Sensing that the little girl behind him pulled his sleeve, he managed to suppress his anger, but he couldn't help but scold, "What's wrong with you? Why do you have to be as vicious as your mother? Get out of here. Get out of here." Su Zipei's face was pale. She was so scared that she stumbled and fell to the ground. She hurt her hand, but she didn't care about the pain. She got up and fled the room in embarrassment. Su Qingtan had time to turn around and ask about Su Li's well-being. Su Li forced a smile and said, "Eldest brother, don't be angry. Zipei is still immature. You were almost slapped in the face, but you still said good things about her." Su Qingtan showed an expression of exasperation. "She is only 1 year younger than you. Don't defend for her in the future. Your eldest brother is not blind. I don't care about what they did before for your sake, but it doesn't mean that I don't care." Su Qingtan couldn't go on, because he found that Su Li didn't listen at all. She kept bowing her head and playing with the corner of her clothes. He sighed helplessly. "Let's go. The waterside pavilion is outside the city. It's almost time to go." "Okay." Su Li immediately raised her head and responded with a smile that was brighter than the sun. Near night, the waterside pavilion in the south of the city was brightly lit. Luxurious carriages almost completely blocked the spacious flagstone road. In order to see the outstanding young general of the Ling family, more than half of the misses in Yunjing City came. What they saw was the smell of rouge. At the same time, many young talents heard the news and came. Even if Ling Ping wanted to choose a wife, he would only choose one. As long as they performed well, they would have a great chance to marry the beauty. Because it was a banquet arranged by the imperial palace, the waiters at the door and the servants were all maids and eunuchs. Su Qingtan took Su Li out of the carriage and was instantly shocked by the scene at the door. He finally knew what it meant to be crowded. If the people who came and went were not dressed in luxurious clothes, he would think that he came to the most prosperous street in Yunjing City. When they approached the door, an old eunuch with extraordinary momentum immediately came to greet them. "I have heard from His Majesty that there is a little genius in Yunjing City. Are you Miss Su Li?" Su Qingtan was shocked when he saw the old eunuch. He quickly saluted and said, "You are Eunuch Feng, the director of the imperial palace." Su Li immediately followed and saluted. The old eunuch immediately waved his hand and smiled very kindly. He said in a sharp voice, "Lord Su is so polite. In addition to arranging the banquet for General Ling, I also have an oral order from His Majesty to pass to Miss Su Li." Su Li was flattered and said, "Since it is His Majesty's oral order, Su Li will obey it." "Eunuch Feng, please tell me clearly." Eunuch Feng was very happy. This girl was much more sensible than the boy before. When he thought that the boy heard his words and turned away, so that he was punished in front of His Majesty, Eunuch Feng couldn't help but have a toothache. Thinking of this, Eunuch Feng looked at Su Li more kindly and said, "Miss Su Li, don't be nervous. It is just an order from His Majesty. If Miss Su Li is free, you can go to the Imperial Palace to see His Majesty and chat with him. His Majesty said that he hasn't seen the royal preceptor for more than 10 years and misses him very much." Su Li nodded slightly, but then shook her head and said, "My master told me that I should finish the homework in the National Book Tower as soon as possible after I arrive in the capital city. I am not allowed to enter the Imperial Palace or be distracted. Although Su Li wants to go, I can't disobey my master's order. So, I have to offend him." Eunuch Feng's face trembled and he immediately felt a toothache. Su Li didn't go after he talked for a long time. She was exactly the same as that boy. But on the surface, Eunuch Feng still showed a smile and said, "I see. Since it is an order from the royal preceptor, I will tell His Majesty truthfully." "Thank you, Eunuch Feng." Su Li bowed apologetically and watched Eunuch Feng leave. Su Qingtan was on tenterhooks. After Eunuch Feng left, he couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Did Dr. Qi really give such an order?" Although Su Qingtan knew Qi Xianqing's identity, he was still used to calling him Dr. Qi. Su Li stuck out her tongue and replied, "Of course. Otherwise, do you think I will lie for this matter?" "No, I won't." Su Qingtan shook his head and said. He wondered why Qi Xianqing didn't let Su Li enter the imperial palace to meet the emperor. What was he worried about? After fooling Su Qingtan, Su Li felt helpless. The emperor of the Dehan country was absolutely a dangerous person. The seniors in the imperial palace were enough to make her afraid. In order not to expose too much, she could only let Qi Xianqing take the blame. Su Qingtan looked around and didn't see Chen Gong or Ling Qinglan. He couldn't help but doubt whether he was cheated by Ling Qinglan. But since they were here, it was good to go to the waterside pavilion with Su Li before the banquet began. Chapter 148. When Su Li and Su Qingtan turned around, the whole manor was so quiet that even the sound of a needle falling could be heard. Clang! There was a heavy sound. In front of the gate of the manor, the crowded guests had different expressions, but they all made way for them. Su Li finally saw who it was. She saw 4 sturdy men carrying a brand new huge black coffin. They walked in firmly. The sound just now was the sound of the coffin falling to the ground. Behind the coffin, there was a brother and sister in luxurious clothes. The boy was as gentle as jade with a smile on his face. The girl was extremely beautiful and mischievous. They were a perfect couple. However, the smiles of the 2 people behind the coffin would only make people feel cold and not warm at all. It's the child and daughter of the Wu family. Only the Wu family sends the coffin at the banquet of the Ling family. This is a banquet hosted by His Majesty the Emperor. Isn't young Master Wu a little too bold? Hush! Be quiet! Su Qingtan and Wu Jin immediately stood in front of Su Li. This person was not a playboy, but a talented student of the College of Martial Arts of the National Academy. Su Li's identity couldn't control him. Besides, Su Qingtan once heard from Ling Qinglan that this person was not happy without women. If he saw the second sister, it would definitely cause unnecessary trouble. Su Li gently put her hands on Su Qingtan's shoulder. She showed a pair of faint eyes, and a red light flashed in her dark pupils. Wu Jin. In this life, I finally see you. I really don't know how long you can live under my means in this life. Wu Jin didn't notice Su Li's gaze. There were at least 800 people watching the show in front of the manor. There were too many people looking at him. He couldn't distinguish all of them. Well, put it down here. Wu Jin gave an order. The 4 sturdy men immediately threw the coffin down. The coffin was extremely heavy. It fell to the ground with a loud bang. Ling Ping, who got the news, finally appeared in front of the lobby. When he saw the black wooden coffin, his face was completely gloomy. Wu Jin, do you really think that I dare not to hurt you with the protection of General Wu? With Ling Ping's words, an extremely fierce pneuma spread from him. That was the horrible killing intent condensed from killing enemies on the battlefield. The guests nearby were frightened by the momentum. Their faces turned pale in an instant and they retreated far away. Su Li was also pulled into the crowd by Su Qingtan, and there was a large empty circle in the field. Wu Jin was the first to bear the brunt. His face was slightly pale, but he did not panic. Instead, he clasped his hands and said, "Second brother Ling, why are you angry? This gift is something that I thought about for a full 3 days before I came up with. Coffins were official positions and wealth. Both are things of fame and fortune. Is it wrong for me to congratulate second brother on his promotion and wealth?" Before Wu Jin finished his words, the girl hiding behind him immediately said, "Brother is right. Second young Master Ling, my brother has good intentions. Even if he were to stand in front of the emperor, he would still be able to reason with him. You're so angry, it's really disappointing for me and my brother. The clear and melodious voice that was like that of an oriole, coupled with the young girl's almost perfect and tender appearance, actually caused the atmosphere to slightly ease up. Many guests sighed in their hearts, Wu Xiuxiu. She really deserves the title of the former first beauty in Yunjing City. It's a pity that there is another Su Li in Yunjing City. I heard that she is really a fairy. Although Wu Xiuxiu is beautiful, she is still an ordinary person. She can't be compared with her. Maybe the voice of the last sentence was a little loud. Wu Xiuxiu suddenly turned her head and looked at the group of guests who were whispering. Her beautiful eyes were full of gloominess and anger. How could she hear that? A group of guests shrank their necks and no longer dared to speak. At this time, Ling Ping restrained his momentum and his face became calm. But his tone was still cold. Master Wu, I appreciate your kindness. Please take this coffin back. Our Ling family can't use it. Wu Jin heard it and clapped his hands. He was full of pity and sighed. What can we do? In order to send a gift to second brother Ling, I specially inquired about your height and size. This coffin is tailor-made for you. Other people can't fit it. As soon as he said that, the field was quiet again. Many people were shocked. Wu Jin clearly cursed Ling Ping to die on purpose. If they were to encounter such a congratulatory message that was filled with malice, they would have flown into a rage long ago. Ling Ping took a deep breath and pointed at the gate of the manor expressionlessly. For the sake of His Majesty, I won't care about the coffin with you. But if you dare to offend him again, even if His Majesty blames me, I will kill you here. Wu Jin's pupils shrank. He laughed repeatedly. Second brother Ling, don't be angry. Since I am not welcome, I will leave. But, this coffin. Boom. Before Wu Jin finished his words, Ling Ping struck with his palm. The wind from the palm scraped along Wu Jin's face. Wu Jin was in pain. Finally, the palm fell on the coffin. The coffin made of solid wood instantly became scattered sawdust. Wu Xiuxiu screamed. Wu Jin covered his red right face and looked terrible. Ling Ping smiled and showed his shining white teeth. He said, This slap is for your father to teach you a lesson. Remember it well. Otherwise, your father will die before you one day. It's so pitiful. Ling Ping said. Wu Jin's eyes became fiercer when he heard that, but he soon calmed down. He smiled and said respectfully, Second brother Ling, thank you for your advice. Since you don't welcome us today, we will leave now. Then, Wu Jin turned around and left. Brother, wait for me. Wu Xiuxiu chased after him with hatred. Before leaving, she glanced at the guests next to her and saw Su Li behind Su Qingtan. Her face was really more beautiful than hers. They just looked at each other, but Wu Xiuxiu panicked for no reason. It seemed that there was a voice in her heart telling her that Su Li was her top enemy and must be eradicated as soon as possible. Wu Xiuxiu, your eldest brother has left. Do you want to stay to attend my banquet? Ling Ping's words suddenly came from behind. Wu Xiuxiu trembled slightly. She didn't have time to think too much and immediately turned around to chase Wu Jin, who had gone far away. The banquet returned to peace, but the atmosphere was not good. Everyone at the banquet was talking about the struggle between the Ling family and the Wu family. There was no meaning of a blind date. In addition, although the Ling family was supported by Ling Ping, it was not as powerful as the Wu family. After weighing the weight of the two families, many young ladies suddenly didn't want to play up to the Ling family. Ling Ping had never thought about getting married and having children, so his expression was normal. After drinking with everyone for a while, he went to the inner hall, as if there were important guests there. It must be Lord Qingong. Su Qingtan showed a regretful expression. What Ling Qinglan said was right, but he didn't say that he was not qualified to go into the inner hall to meet his idol. He came to the banquet in vain. Eldest brother, don't be discouraged. Since that lord is your idol, he must be noble. If there is a chance in the future, there will be a chance to meet and talk with him. Su Li comforted him softly. Su Qingtan couldn't help but laugh. You little girl, don't you know who Lord Qingong is? He is noble, but he is not a person who is easy to get along with. I just want to see him from a distance. As for talking with him, forget it. Su Li responded and didn't say much. She was more and more curious about who Qingong was. In the middle of the night, the banquet was over. Su Qingtan went back with regret. In the end, he didn't see Qingong coming out of the gate of the manor. The next morning, Su Li came to the affiliated school of the National Academy. There was still no one in the affiliated school. In fact, as a lecturer of the affiliated school, she could order the National Academy to inform the families and even threaten that if they didn't come, she would expel those playboys from the National Academy. But she didn't do that. She was not the senior fellow apprentice. She didn't have so many new medicines to experiment. If those playboys didn't come, she was happy to be quiet. She could hide in the alchemy room of the affiliated school to refine medicine and practice. It couldn't be more comfortable. Why did she ask for trouble? But, so many days have passed. Haven't Fong Yuan and others entered the city yet? Su Li frowned slightly. Adding up the time spent on the road, it had been a month. Fong Yuan and others didn't have the burden of the carriage of the Su family. It didn't take them much time to come to Yunjing. Why did it take so long? Although it was strange, Su Li didn't worry too much. She had told the three of them about the Hehuan sect. If they still died in the hands of the Hehuan sect, they could only blame themselves. After a day's practice, Su Li went back as usual. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on the street, which was splendid and pleasing to the eye. It seems that there are fewer people on the street today. Su Li lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked outside. Suddenly, the carriage shook and instantly sped up into the dark alley next to it. Su Li noticed it earlier and immediately jumped out of the window. She rolled a few times like a gourd. Before she could stand firm, buzz. 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 6 arrows were shot from different directions. In the blink of an eye, all the dodging angles were blocked. Su Li's pupils shrank slightly. She shook her sleeves and a dagger slipped out. She waved the dagger to block 3 of the arrows. Then she immediately jumped away and fled deeper into the alley. At the same time, the inborn psychic awareness quietly flowed like mercury. The 9 killers in the dark immediately had no place to hide. 9 people in the acquired 9th hurdle. With her cultivation, she could deal with these people in an instant, but she couldn't do that. She wasn't sure if there were other eyes watching this scene. If she really made a move, it was very likely that she would expose herself, and that would be truly dangerous. The head of the killers hiding at the street corner outside saw Su Li escape inside and couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Although this silly girl had the cultivation of the acquired 8th hurdle, she had little experience in fighting. She actually took the initiative to escape to a place with few people. It really saved them a lot of trouble. Whoosh! 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 Thinking of this, the head of the killers waved his hand. The other 8 killers immediately moved and rushed into the dark alley with awe-inspiring killing intent. With the inborn psychic awareness, Su Li knew the terrain very well. She could always detect the killers coming and avoid them in advance. Seeing the 9 killers scurrying in the alley like headless flies, Su Li was not very happy. She had already noticed that the structure of the alley was simple. There were only 8 exits. If the killers searched everywhere, she would definitely be found. What should she do? Suddenly, Suli saw another person appear at the corner of the dark alley in her psychic awareness. There were no black-masked killers around. This person looked more than 40 years old. He wore a blue cloth which was very shabby. A corner of the cloth was torn off and covered his face. Obviously, he just came in with a mask and was not with the 9 people. What's the matter? Suli frowned slightly. She clearly saw that this person's cultivation reached the peak of the acquired realm. It was impossible that he didn't know that this was a killing trap. How could he come into the alley and get involved in this mess? Seeing that the person was getting closer and closer to her hiding place, Suli only thought for a few seconds and took the initiative to breathe heavily. Sure enough, the person was happy after hearing that and immediately rushed to Suli. Chapter 149. The middle-aged man in blue hesitated for a moment before he approached her and said in a very low voice, "Little girl, I am here to save you. Come out quickly and leave with me." Suli put away the dagger and stood out of the haystack with a panicked look. Seeing this, the middle-aged man in blue softened his eyes and immediately took Suli along the alley to a locked iron gate of a courtyard. Then Suli saw him take out a key. With the help of the middle-aged man in blue, Suli was able to climb out of the back window of the house and left the alley without being noticed. Before she left, she saw in her psychic awareness that the 9 killers were still in the alley and were conducting a carpet search. At this moment, it was already dark and there were few people on the street. The middle-aged man in blue seemed to be worried and didn't let Suli go home by herself. Instead, he took Suli to walk through the streets and alleys and came to a house that looked very dilapidated. The middle-aged man in blue pushed the door open and let Suli in. While taking off the cloth, he said, "It's too dangerous at night. This is my home. If you don't mind, you can stay here for one night and go home in the morning." Suli saw the face of the middle-aged man in blue. It was very ordinary. He was the kind of person who would be ignored in common people. The only eye-catching thing was his messy beard. I don't mind. Suli quickly shook her head and then made a salute. "Uncle, thank you for saving my life." The middle-aged man in blue was expressionless and didn't respond to Suli's gratitude. He turned around and said, "I'll see if there is anything to eat in the house." This reaction made Suli slightly stunned. It seemed that the middle-aged man's temperament was a bit interesting. He was serious in speech and manner and seemed to have a heart of stone. He didn't seem to be the kind of person who would save people, but he saved her. Interesting. Suli thought of this and followed the middle-aged man in blue into the house. What she saw made her stunned again. Was there really someone living in this place? The seemingly spacious main hall of the house had no other furniture except a table and 2 chairs. It was empty as if it had been emptied. Suli went to the inner room and saw that there was nothing but a bed in the room, not even clothes. At this time, the middle-aged man in blue came out with 2 bowls of noodles and placed them on the table. He said in an old-fashioned voice, "Come and have some noodles." The voice seemed to lack the emotions of a human and sounded more like a robot. Suli heard the sound and came out. Seeing 2 bowls of simple water on the table, she didn't show any other strange expression. She sat down and picked up the chopsticks to eat. Such a reaction made the middle-aged man in blue surprised. It seemed that in his guess, Suli was dressed like a daughter of a noble family. Even if Bai Shui had good self-restraint, she couldn't eat it. Sensing the gaze of the middle-aged man in blue, Suli smiled and said, "Although I am dressed like this, I didn't even have a meal when I was a child." The white water surface was already very good. "By the way, eldest uncle, I haven't asked for your name yet. My name is Suli. I forgot to tell you my name just now. I'm sorry. Suli. The eyes of the middle-aged man in blue suddenly became sharp. Which Suli? Suli of the National Academy. Suli smiled embarrassedly. I didn't expect you to recognize me. The middle-aged man in blue didn't want to chat with Suli. Instead, he looked at her with burning eyes and said in a cold voice, "Do you know the background of those killers?" Suli was stunned. The tone of the middle-aged man in blue reminded her of some unpleasant past events. Seeing Suli's silence, the middle-aged man in blue came to his sense. Suli was not his prisoner. He smiled bitterly in his heart and reluctantly pulled the corner of his mouth, revealing a smile that he thought was kind but was actually as scary as a ghost. I scared you. Those killers are likely to be related to the case I am investigating, so I am a little excited. Miss Sue, please don't blame me. Suli's eyes flashed, but her tone was naive. Investigation. Are you also a member of the Supreme Judiciary, like my eldest brother? The middle-aged man in blue was silent for a moment and then said, in addition to the Supreme Judiciary, there is another place to investigate cases. I am Chen Gong of the Ministry of Penalty. Suli's pupils shrank slightly. This person was the ruthless official of the Ministry of Penalty. Su Qingtan repeatedly mentioned the name of Chen Gong, so she went to the National Book Tower to check it today. Then she knew that Chen Gong was a famous ruthless official of the Dehan country. He was noble and upright. He never accepted bribes and his family was as poor as a church. On the other hand, he used cruel means to torture prisoners. Even the subordinates of the Ministry of Penalty couldn't stand it. Every family in the Dehan country even used the name of Chen Gong to frighten their children. He was really a ruthless person who could stop children from crying. However, Suli looked at the plain noodles cooked by Lord Chen, whose hands were full of blood. It seemed that he was not as ruthless as the rumor said. However, his family was really as poor as a church. It was appropriate to use the 4 bare walls to describe the situation. It seems that you have heard of this name. If you can't eat the noodles, don't eat them. Chen Gong's voice was flat. There was no joy or sorrow on his face. No one could know what he was thinking. Suli smiled and took another mouthful of noodles. When Chen Gong's expression changed slightly, she analyzed, I am not very clear about the background of the 4 people. I just saw that there were few people on the street, so I was alert. Later, the carriage suddenly got out of control. I jumped out of the carriage in time. But I was too scared at that time and hid in the alley when I saw it. Chen Gong frowned. He didn't get any clue from Suli's words. When he looked up, he saw the girl stick out her tongue. His heart softened unconsciously. If she was still alive, their daughter should be 12 or 13 years old. After eating the noodles, Suli took the initiative to clean up the dishes. Chen Gong looked at her petite back. His eyes full of vicissitudes were full of bitterness. He murmured, You don't allow me to bring a woman back. This girl is 1 or 2 years older than our daughter. She shouldn't be counted. After cleaning up quickly, Suli returned to the house, but she didn't see Chen Gong. She spread out her psychic awareness and found that there was a room behind the house. She immediately looked for it and walked to the door. Before she stepped in, she heard a cold shout inside the door, Stop. It was Chen Gong. Suli stopped and retreated to the door again. But it didn't prevent her from seeing the scene in the room clearly. Were those lanterns? There were all kinds of colorful lanterns in the room. They were all connected with ropes and hung in the air. The ground was covered with the traces of burning candles, which were very thick. It seemed that the candles had been burned dozens or even hundreds of times. Chen Gong stood in the lanterns with his back to Su Li. He didn't say anything, but Su Li could feel his breath, which was heavy and decadent. After a while, Su Li didn't disobey Chen Gong's order and turned away. She rested in the room for a night and didn't see Chen Gong come back. It seemed that he stood in the room for a whole night. At dawn the next day, Su Li got up and tidied up the floor. When she came to the kitchen, she saw that there was nothing except flour. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. It was rare that Chen Gong had the strength to investigate the case even though he ate plain water every day. Walking to the vegetable field in the backyard, Su Li finally found a few cabbages and onions. She picked them and added some fresh seasoning she carried with her. Soon, 2 bowls of fragrant Yangchen noodles were made. When Su Li put the noodles on the table, Chen Gong came out from the back room. He sniffed and saw 2 bowls of Yangchen noodles on the table. He couldn't help but be stunned. "Uncle Chen, I can't repay you for saving my life yesterday. I can only make a bowl of noodles as a token of appreciation." Su Li took the chopsticks and handed them to him with a bright smile. "I haven't cooked for a long time. Have a taste, uncle." Chen Gong lowered his head and hesitated for a moment. Then he took the chopsticks and picked up the noodles. He took a bite and chewed it. Then he started to eat. The sound of slurping was endless. Seeing that he was eating happily, Su Li immediately handed her bowl to him. Chen Gong didn't refuse. He took it and continued to eat. His cheeks were bulging, and he didn't say a word from beginning to end. Soon, the second bowl was finished. Su Li smiled and squinted her eyes. She would be very happy if someone liked to eat what she cooked. "Uncle, wait for me. I'll cook again." Then Su Li got up and went to the kitchen. When she turned her back, she didn't see the stern middle-aged official behind her. He lowered his head and wiped his face with his hands. In the kitchen, Su Li took the flour and poured it out. Chen Gong suddenly appeared at the door and said in a deep voice, "It's enough. You go back and tell your family that you are safe. I'm leaving." Before Su Li replied, Chen Gong turned around and went into the room. It didn't take long for him to change into an official uniform and leave the yard. The door of the yard was not locked. Su Li stopped what she was doing. Her eyes were shining. Chen Gong, whom her eldest brother worshipped, seemed to be a little interesting. After cleaning up and closing the gate of the courtyard, Su Li returned to the Su house along the busy street. Su Qingtan just came back after a night search. He was anxious in the room. Seeing Su Li come back safe and sound, he was overjoyed and hugged Su Li tightly. "You little girl, I didn't see you all night. Do you want me to die of worry?" "Eldest brother, I almost couldn't come back." Su Li's nose turned sour and tears fell down. Su Qingtan felt distressed. He quickly coaxed her and listened to what happened yesterday. "Were there killers? Did Lord Chen Gong save you?" Su Qingtan was full of fear. If Chen Gong didn't save Su Li, he didn't dare to think about the consequences yesterday. Second sister didn't offend anyone in Yunjing. How could there be killers? Su Qingtan was puzzled. He had tried his best to let Su Li live in seclusion. She didn't go to other places except the National Academy. Even at the banquet last time, he tried his best to stop Su Li from being seen by the people of the Wu family. In this way, there was still trouble. For the first time, Su Qingtan felt that the forces in Yunjing City were full of malice. "It doesn't matter, eldest brother. After this, I will go to the crowded street and won't take a carriage casually. I believe that those bad guys won't be so rampant to kill me in broad daylight." Su Li comforted him softly. Su Qingtan couldn't help but sigh. She was in danger, but she comforted him. Li, you finally come back. We are worried about you. Su Huanli appeared outside the door. When he saw Su Li, his eyes brightened. He immediately came in and said, "By the way, Li, the new place of the Byway building has been selected. The new site of the Byway building has been selected. You can go there today to see if it is suitable. If it is suitable, immediately design the kitchen boiler. I will order someone to repair it." Su Qingtan frowned and said in a low voice, "Father, second sister just escaped from death. She needs a rest. The matter of the Byway building is not urgent. Let's talk about it later." "What later?" Su Huanli suddenly became angry and loudly scolded, "You are not in charge of the family. You don't know the price of daily necessities. Our Su family has moved to Yunjing for a month. The maids needed money, the servants also needed money, and the food, clothing, and daily necessities all needed money. And the medicine for your first aunt's injury is not cheap. If it goes on like this, we will all have nothing to eat." Chapter 150. "Look, your second sister said so." Su Huanli's face brightened and he was not angry anymore. He immediately pulled Su Li to go out. Su Qingtan was helpless. He pointed at Su Li for a long time without saying anything. Finally, he could only say with concern, "Be careful on the way." "I know, eldest brother." Su Li smiled sweetly and left with Su Huanli in the carriage. After they left, Su Qingtan looked a little gloomy. He must find out the killer. Otherwise, he always felt uncomfortable being stared at in the dark. Su Huanli took Su Li to the most prosperous Zhongtan Street in Yunjing City. This road was the main road of Yunjing City. It was connected with the gate of Yunjing City and the gate of the Imperial City. It was the most crowded place in the entire Yunjing City. Every year, the Imperial Court's sacrifice team would pass here. The rent was astronomical, and the Su family could not afford it at all. "Father, do you want to buy a shop on this street?" Su Li couldn't help but ask. Su Huanli's face trembled and he scolded with a smile, "You little girl, what nonsense are you talking about? How can our Su family afford to buy a shop on Zhongtan Street?" While talking, the carriage drove into the alley on the side of Middle Altar Street and passed through to the second-class Back Altar Street. There were not many things here, but there were many inns, restaurants, and wineries. Moreover, because of the terrain, people could still see the good scenery of Zhongtan Street from the second floor of Houghton Street as long as there were no tall buildings blocking the view. Su Huanli pointed to the empty two-story shop with 3 windows at the corner of the street and said, "Look. It is the best place in the whole Houghton Street. Your grandma and I think that the location of the Byway building can't be bad. Let's rent this restaurant for 3 months first. It's not too late to buy it after we earn enough money." Su Li's eyes flashed. She didn't expect that Su Huanli was smart in business and chose such a good location. "Father, how much is the rent of this shop a month?" Su Huanli was excited and said, "It's 10,000 taels a month. Li, you have to work hard to earn back the rent every month. Otherwise, I will lose a lot." Although he said so, Su Huanli's face was red. The taste of the beggar's chicken and the location of the restaurant were natural advantages. The business couldn't be bad. "I will do my best." After Su Li entered the shop, she was busy designing the kitchen boiler and adjusting the layout of the building. A day passed unconsciously. Under her adjustment, the ordinary decoration of the restaurant with no highlights became fresh and elegant with the embellishment of potted ornaments, which made people's eyes light up. "All right. You deserve to be my daughter. You are good at doing business." Haha. Su Huanli laughed heartily. Now, only the plaque of the restaurant and the back kitchen were not ready. After these two things were ready, he could open the restaurant on a good day. When Suli went to the second floor, she was surprised to see the name of a restaurant diagonally opposite. Solitary Abode. The name of the Byway building was the same as that of the Byway building, and it was suppressed by the name of the Byway building. When the Byway building was built, the Byway building and the Byway building would be at loggerheads with each other. Troubles were inevitable. However, she didn't remind Su Huanli. How much the Su family earned had nothing to do with her, right? In the next 2 days, Su Li resumed her normal life. She practiced hard in the affiliated school every day. There were enough elixirs in the affiliated school. Her cultivation changed almost every day. In just a few days, she jumped from the inborn third hurdle to the inborn fifth hurdle. The reason was that she had accumulated in the inborn third hurdle. But this speed was really shocking. It overturned the saying that the cultivation progress was slow after the inborn hurdle. When Su Li was striving to reach the inborn sixth hurdle, Fang Yuan and the other two finally came to Yunjing City. They didn't go to find Su Li immediately. Instead, they left the people of the Tianya house and bought a yard in the city as a temporary place to rest. Not long after they entered the city, the news came to Ling Li's ears. It's 10 days late, and they disappeared immediately after entering the city. Ling Li rubbed his chin and smiled slightly. She finally used the wooden token he left. However, it was not a good thing that Su Li moved the secret force into the city. Thinking of the news from the Tianya house, Ling Li frowned. The situation in Yunjing City was getting more and more complicated. Master, Su Li was assassinated 2 days ago. Finally, she was rescued by Qingong. Our people didn't help her. Ling Imo meant that the group of killers actually couldn't do anything to Su Li. Ling Li said, "What is her cultivation?" Ling Li glanced at Ling Xian, who was listening quietly, and said, "The acquired eighth hurdle." Hearing this, Ling Xian's eyes instantly relaxed a lot, but it was not seen by Ling Imo and Ling Li. Ling Li heard it and smiled. Half a year ago, she had reached the peak of the acquired hurdle. She could refine elixirs and help him jump 2 hurdles in the inborn hurdle. If Su Li hadn't reached the inborn hurdle after such a long time, it would be a joke. But Ling Li was not sure what realm Su Li had reached. He estimated that she had at least reached the inborn third hurdle. Ling Imo and Ling Xian practiced with him since childhood, but they were just in the inborn fourth hurdle. Besides, the Byway building of the Su family is about to open. Ling Mo reminded him. Ling Li smiled and said, "It seems that second brother has to be a shield." Su Li's name was well known in Yunjing. Fang Yuan and the other two didn't ask much but got all the news about Su Li. They couldn't help but be speechless. They ate dirt and dust on the road, but Su Li lived a comfortable life. The three made do with a dinner and had a comfortable sleep. The next day, they finally recovered their spirits and began to look for a new location for the Linli building. Su Li had a requirement for the new location of the Linli building. It must not be within 10 miles of the imperial city. She couldn't choose any place within 10 miles of Yunjing City. Because the ground of Yunjing City within 10 miles was extremely hard white stone. It was too difficult to dig out an underground space. The wine of the Linli building was unique. It was not afraid that other wineries would follow suit. Even if the location was a little remote, it didn't matter. People who liked wine would come to the Linli building. There were many shops that met Su Li's requirements. The three shopped for a long time and selected 10 shops. Finally, they decided to let Su Li decide. At midnight, a dart was shot on the edge of Su Li's bed. Su Li opened her eyes and took down the dart. She opened the note tied to it. It was a word, Fong. Su Li put on the black clothes and listened to Su Qingtan's voice for a while. After confirming that Su Qingtan was in a deep sleep, she flew to the roof like a night elf and flew straight to the direction where the dart came from. It didn't take long for her to find Feng Yuan hiding in the dark of the alley. Feng Yuan didn't see Su Li for a long time. He stood up in a panic. When he was about to speak, Su Li covered his mouth with her fingertips and transmitted the sound in silence. Yunjing City is not like the Qinghe town. It is dangerous at night. Don't make a sound. Take me to your yard first. Feng Yuan calmed down and nodded slightly. Then he flashed out to lead the way. After a while, Su Li took off the black hood and looked at the yard. She praised, "It's very good. The location of the yard is secluded. It's a good place to stay." Chu Qingning and Yin Xuedong heard the sound and came out. They were happy to see Su Li. Although all of them had good brains and good cultivation, if they didn't have Su Li as the backbone, they would be in a state of disunity. They couldn't form a fighting force at all. "Let's go in and talk about it." Su Li stretched out her hands and used her psychic awareness to explore the surroundings. Then she took them into the yard with confidence. There were too many seniors in Yunjing City. The inborn fifth hurdle was at most the upper level. She had to be careful. In the study, the four people sat opposite to each other. Yin Xuedong carefully took out the yellow and wrinkled thin paper from the wooden box and said, "Fortunately, we got there in time. After we got it by some means, we were chased by the officers and soldiers the next day." Lin Xiang had died in the exile team. Seeing so many thin papers, Su Li couldn't help but stare. She picked up one of them and looked at it carefully. "There is another thing worth noting." Chu Qingning added with a strange look, "Lin Yanqing disappeared. When we went there, we didn't see him. It seemed that he disappeared directly from the team. If he is alive, we don't see him. If he is dead, we don't see his corpse. It's really weird." Su Li glanced at the three words, Hongshan powder, on the thin paper. Her eyes flashed with extremely bright light. She said lightly, "Don't worry about Lin Yanqing. He has some qualifications. It's not strange that he is taken away by people in the martial arts circle. Those sects disdained killing in the secular world. Most of them, Lin Yanqing will do it himself later. But Yan Hongxiu has a spiritual bow. I also gave Yan Zai a lucky chance. It's hard to say whether Lin Yanqing can save the brother and sister." Feng Yuan was at ease and was not surprised. Su Li always liked to arrange all things well. It seemed that she could predict the future. Even if there was an accident, she would quickly find a remedy. This was the charm of her personality. "Well, let's not talk about that." Su Li put the thin paper close to her body and then said, "When you entered the city today, did you go to see the site of the Linli building?" "Of course." Chu Qingning immediately became complacent. He took out the map of Yunjing City from his arms and spread it on the table. There were 10 red circles marked on the map. They were the last 10 after they screened. Su Li slightly squinted her eyes. Without hesitation, she pointed at one of them. Yin Xuedong came over to have a look and felt strange. They had eliminated this shop before. The land was a little expensive, and the shop was in the alley. No one could see it at all. Why did Su Li take a fancy to it? "Just do as I said." Su Li marked the location again. She had thought about it a long time ago. She asked Feng Yuan and others to find it just to deceive others, especially to deceive a shop. This time, you come to the underground addendum in person. Don't let the craftsman find it. And you have to guard against the spying of the next shop. This shop is next to a winery. It is opened by a couple who have reached the inborn realm. You have to be careful. Su Li warned. Feng Yuan and others immediately narrowed their eyes. Two inborn masters opened a winery. Was it a joke? How about? Chu Qingning rubbed his hands and said with a smile, how about changing the place? He was a little flustered to open the leanly building full of secrets next to two inborn seniors. Su Li smiled and said, how can that be? I am going to invite those two people to join me. If I change the place, I will have no chance at all. That's settled. You three should start work early. My identity is quite sensitive now. It's not appropriate for me to show up too much. Fang Yuan nodded and said, don't worry. I won't let you worry too much. He already had some clues about the third hurdle of AO sword skills. Presumably, in a few months, he could surpass Luo Yichen and become the second inborn senior of the Linli building. At this moment, he still didn't know that Luo Yichen had become an inborn senior from AO sword skills in the secluded place of Dawang village. That night, Su Li quietly returned to the Su house. Fortunately, she didn't meet anyone who worked at night. The opening of the Baiwei building and the Linli building were in full swing. Thanks to Su Qingtan, Su Li didn't need help from either side. She still commuted between the Su house and the National Academy every day. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.